What is going on, Rotogrinders? Dean here. It's Dean 7904 if you want to get all technical on me. It's actually 10:18 on the East Coast, 7:18 on the West Coast, 9:18 Tennessee time. Of course, it's time for the flagship show here at Rotogrinders. It's called Grinderslive. We stumbled out of the gate just a little bit, so no time for pleasantries. We're going to be here, park your keister, for the next, 2.5 hours? Let's round up 2 hours and 40 minutes, give or take. Taking you guys all up to kickoff. Joining me today, you all know Rebar. From the worksheets, from the Pick Six show we do in the middle of the week with John Daigle. You know him as Zach Morris on Twitter. Rebar, how are we doing these on Sunday?
Good. Now that we got everything, up and running, we had a little slowdown here with the video, but it's nice to talk to you twice in 1 week. And, we usually talk early in the week when we're trying to figure out what's going to go on news-wise throughout the week. And now Sunday morning, we pretty much have a good grasp on who's in, who's out, what we have to deal with, and how we're going to finally head into this slate of week 9.
You're going to hit your quota. You're going to have your fill of me in about 12 minutes or so, but I appreciate that. I'm thrilled to talk to you as well. And I'm happy that it's a good thing we wasted 4 minutes on Chase Daniel on Wednesday. That was a fun conversation. That's not necessary anymore, as Matthew Stafford is going to give it a go. We know most things today. I assume it's the Zeke thing. Zeke playing late today at 4:00, and they did call up a running back. There are reports out there that he's likely to give it a go, and also people are trying to read the tea leaves like, well, they're in a bye week and they're going to play Pittsburgh and they're going to get ravaged, so maybe just don't play him. But we shall see. Kind of stay tuned on that one and act accordingly. And maybe the next show they'll touch more on that and how to deal with that as far as tournaments and pivots. And Keenan Allen also in that game too, and looks like he's passed his COVID test and he's expected to be fine, and he is dealing with a bit of a throat. But as far as we can tell as right now, he's going to play in that later game as well. Tate not playing today. Ridley all but officially ruled out. Watkins out as well. CMC expected back. I just saw a report a few minutes ago dropped on Twitter basically saying they're not going to give him too many consecutive plays in a row. Maybe I don't think he's going to be out there or just not touching the ball, or if it's just what do we make of that? Christian McCaffrey, one of the best things about him, besides being good, is he's on the field for every snap, and that's probably not going to be the case today.
Yeah, I've seen a report that they were talking about maybe rotating series as well. So we'll see how it plays out. It would have been a spot we would have been all over, Christian McCaffrey, especially against the Chiefs. They don't care about stopping the run, and we know we're going to get a lot of dropbacks in that game as well. I still think he's, I'm not going to run completely overboard because he was a guy that was playing 95% of snaps. So any reduction is you just go from not being the top running back in terms of snaps played and snap allotment to being like a top 5 guy. With any regression or any reduction in terms of usage. So, McCaffrey, they can reduce his usage, and he could still also remain one of the most highly used running backs in the league still. It's, just one game back. It's a little trepidation, and maybe you're not going to go and pay that salary in cash games, but I'm not going to completely ignore him either.
Yeah, we'll talk about that and a little bit more, expand on it. We'll talk about running backs in a second. We go position here, obviously. Talking quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends. Well, we'll get some defense and some stacks out there as well. And I presume, in theory, we had some time for the chat. We shall see if you guys say something interesting as we're going along. I have you guys up. What's up, YouTube? Feel free to like and subscribe. We do appreciate that. And we go ahead and drop. If you guys are curious, we got Ross' weather report. Of course, it's not as urgent as it was last week. I'm happy to not talk about weather today, but it is worth noting, I suppose. The night game is one of the teams most goofy. We're talking main slate, obviously, but the one in Tampa is orange currently, according to Ross' model. This might have something to do with the tropical storm that's going to be coming up in Florida. I imagine that's the case, but I'm down here in Florida as well, and it's been raining on and off, so hopefully we can dodge the weather as we broadcast, because that would be annoying to the listeners for sure. Kansas City, 15, 20-mile-per-hour winds, potentially getting up to 30 mile per hour as far as gusts, but otherwise not much really going on. Take a peek at that and chat, feel free. All right, let's dive in. Do you want to give an overall assessment as far as this slate, or just dive in and talk about some quarterbacks?
Yeah, we could do wherever direction you want to take us. It is a fun slate. Like you said, we don't have the weather concerns that kind of overshadowed everything last week, but we've got kind of a lot of guys either out this week, kind of some weird value spots. So, we'll touch on whoever you want to touch on, and you just steer the ship for us, Dean.
Yeah, the show we normally do, we focus on 3 games. We kind of branch out on that, and that's probably a good place to start as far as quarterbacks because, Josh Allen, Russell Wilson feel like just really, really special plays. Allen, of course, has not been great of late, but now this matchup, just the matchup here against Seattle, we know how putrid they are in the secondary, how they're just a sieve as far as yielding fantasy points, not just the quarterbacks, but the receivers as well, too. Do you have a take as far as Wilson versus Allen? And, of course, Wilson's just every single week. The floor is incredible. The ceiling's nice as well. That feels like a pretty good starting point. And Devin, our producer, is going to have, some of our lineup HQ stuff, and they'll expand on this more in the next show. They'll kind of dig into it as well. But as far as the ownership, that's what we see on FanDuel at 14%, 13% as far as Wilson. Those are the top two guys as far as ownership. And then on DK, the cap is a little bit tighter. It's a little bit trickier. We have Allen, then Watson, then Wilson. And we'll talk about Locke. I think is a little bit more interesting on DK just because for me at least, I'm having some issues getting all the stuff I want in there. And he's fairly cheap, and we do live in the world of salary cap. But let's talk about that Seattle-Buffalo game, which we featured on Wednesday. Nothing's changed there. We have to be excited. And good weather in Buffalo despite the time of year.
Yeah, we'll take it. I'm actually, in Cleveland. We saw the weather that was in Cleveland Raiders last week. We're projected to set a, record high for today. It's supposed to be 75 degrees on November 8th. So, the East Coast is looking good so far right now. It's amazing how all those things, we won't make it a political show. I'd say all those things just didn't disappear after a day. But Russell Wilson, Josh Allen is the kind of the premier stat game. It's the game probably everyone's most excited about in these early games. You're probably going to get out to a lead if you stack this game. That's what we're looking at. I mean, Russell Wilson, he's only been below the 7th highest scoring quarterback in a week just once. And in that week, he still had 21 fantasy points. He's just been locked in. Not only has he thrown multiple touchdown passes in every game, he's thrown 3 or more in 6 of his 7 games. So just he's been hyper efficient. He's been uber effective. Granted, I mean, there's going to be a point where he's not going to maintain a 10% touchdown rate the entire season, we would think. But he just keeps this train moving. It's hard to get away from. Josh Allen, on the other hand, has been kind of not great the past month. He was a top 5 quarterback in his first 4 games, and he's been QB 15 or lower in his past 4. Still offers you some of that rushing equity. And then the Seattle pass defense, not only from a volume, but a volume plus efficiency stance allowed. I mean, the quarterbacks against Seattle are attempting a league high 46.9 pass attempts per game. And we always say, well, we won't always want to chase volume with quarterbacks, but that's the type of volume that's tangible regardless. I'll pushing 50 pass attempts. And then they're also, on efficiency stance, giving it up to quarterbacks. So they're 25th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 25th in completion rate allowed to passers. So, I mean, it's a bounce back spot for Josh Allen. And like I said, we always get a little bit of that rushing ability with him. So, I mean, it's hard to get away, I think, from those two guys as being kind of where you want to start the slate at.
Pick one, Allen or Wilson.
I'll go Allen just because I think that they'll have to chase points more often, and I don't trust their running game as more. As in, you get more overall touchdown equity, team touchdown equity from Allen than you do Wilson by a little bit.
Oh, does that mean you trust DJ Dallas? I don't want to talk about that. We'll talk about DJ Dallas. That's like one of the biggest conundrums for me as far as lineup building. We'll get to that soon enough. Getting away from that game from a quarterback perspective, Watson is an incredible matchup here against Jacksonville. Herbert's just been phenomenal in his rookie season. Nice matchup here against Vegas. Murray off the board. I don't think people are going to play, but of course the upside is immense. We know Miami much more vulnerable to the run than to the pass. And then Mahomes, who's just been spectacular, is going to be – he's super expensive on FanDuel, $9.3K. And then there's Lamar, who, maybe we just keep trying to think he's going to be the same guy as he was last year. And, now the price is starting to adjust. He's $31 at Yahoo, which is a pretty appealing price. I know we talked about this on Wednesday. This is his second time ever in his life, in the NFL life, playing in a dome. Love him on the turf for sure.
It's only his third. Well, they're going to open the roof. I've been kind of following this all week because they're opening the roof in Indy. So he still only played one career fully dome game. This is just his third start in a non-outdoor stadium because it kind of isn't, but it's the retro roof stadium. So I mean, it's only his 6th career start on turf, like non-grass. So, I mean, to me, all that stuff's appealing. And maybe it's a narrative I'm working up in my head, but I just get the idea of this Ravens team, the way they're built offensively, and the fact that they play in this, the AFC North, they play in, some bad weather games. They always play on grass. It's a team that's built to play on a fast track. So I'm kind of excited that they're playing on a fast track. I still think the Colts, I still need to see the Colts punch up. So I mean, they're not a team I'm not
Defensively.
necessarily, I'm not necessarily scared of them at any level either, despite the little numbers that'll be next to where Lamar ranks. And then even on the flip side of this too, this is a game that swung back and forth from a betting side like all week. It was early as late as yesterday. The Colts were favored at one point yesterday. Now it's swung back, and the Ravens look like they're given 1.5 if you get it today. But it's really a game that the bettors have gone back and forth on all time. But I like the Ravens in this game a lot, and I'm thinking that this is a spot for Lamar. And if you want, I think J.K. Dobbins is interesting where he's priced in that game at 53 and 49 on each respective site. So I can get 16 J.K. Dobbins touches again on a fast track against the worst defense in the Pittsburgh Steelers. I feel like that's a guy at that kind of pricing I want to take a swing on, maybe housing one of those 40-yard runs or, having type of ceiling week. And he's getting a couple targets per game as well. The only thing with J.K. Dobbins is, we can't take him on at that price probably in cash games because we don't know if he's going to get a touchdown, probably low touchdown equity. If they get inside the 5, it'll probably be Gus Edwards. But at those kind of prices, I mean, last time we saw J.K. Dobbins play a game in Lucas Oil Field, he had 170 yards of scrimmage.
Wow.
Those aren't transitive property from the college of the NFL, but I mean, he's a guy. I mean, I'm excited to see this Ravens on that fast track. And we've got a squeaky wheel Marquise Brown situation as well. I mean, both Lamar Jackson and Greg Roman have come out and openly said they want to get him the football today. And the Indianapolis Colts have allowed 5 touchdowns to opposing wide receiver ones this year. So, I mean, the Ravens, I think, are a little bit intriguing, and they're a team that people have chased unsuccessfully. So we don't see that ownership completely spike up to where I think it typically would. But I like that offense to kind of bounce back today.
Yeah, I talk about the martingale strategy with Lamar, and I keep playing him, and I think he's due. And and if nobody's going to play him, like I know what his upside is. He can get 100 yards on the ground and run a couple in as well too. And I like Brown, especially where he's cheap. He's cheap on FanDuel. He's cheap on Yahoo. He's fine on DK. What did he say? He was a soldier. Or get the ball to your soldier, whatever it is. And Lamar seemed to apologize. My bad. I should be getting the ball to you, and we'll figure it out. I suppose they are down a couple offensive linemen. Are we concerned about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you look at Lamar so far this season. I mean, that's kind of been one of the areas that's been why we've seen him kind of dip in production a little bit. He has been pressured on 22.4% of his dropbacks. It's the 11th highest rate in the NFL. Last year, it was 16.2%. It was the second lowest in the NFL. So, you lose Ronnie Stanley off the board, the premier left tackle. We already had lost Marshall Yonda to retirement. So, I mean, you lose 2 blue chip offensive linemen that won't play in this game against a Colts defensive line that is actually good too. Getting DeForest Buckner, that front is strong. So that is something that's going to play into a factor. Maybe taking some of them deep shots, but I mean, at that kind of pricing, we're talking about only connecting on maybe 1 or 2 anyways. For a guy like Hollywood, I think he's a little tougher to play, like you said, on DK at 6 flat, because he's not a guy that stacks receptions regardless. We know there's a cap, like a target limit on Hollywood Brown. He's not going to get 12 targets. He's not probably even going to get 9 targets. Probably being somewhere in that 6 to 8 range of targets, and that's just not a guy on DraftKings that he doesn't play favorably into the kind of scoring at that kind of price. He would need to be a little bit cheaper, I think, for me to be really excited outside of a blind tournament dart. And Lamar in itself is always a guy you don't have to necessarily stack Lamar ever.
Yeah,
which is something that also leaves the door open. We don't have to stack him. I think it is easy to play those guys on FanDuel though, especially Hollywood at 5.8 on FanDuel, where we're not chasing the receptions. We're looking for the splash play.
Yeah, I'll play Lamar a la carte for sure. I have no issue with that. By the way, fun fact about Hollywood Brown. I don't know if it's well, here's a fact. Hollywood Brown, I thought he was nicknamed Hollywood because he's a flashy receiver. He was born in Hollywood, Florida. So I don't know why he's nicknamed Hollywood. It's one of those 2 reasons. I want to ask him this. This is important stuff. You have to learn on a DFS show. Hey, Deshaun Watson, you talk about narratives, by the way. You can build your own narrative as far as, Will Fuller was on the block and supposedly the Packers didn't want to pay up for him. Maybe Watson wants to say, hey, you're my guy. I'm going to feed you and make it happen. And, hey, you get the ready-made matchup here against Jacksonville as well, too. How do we feel about Watson? I like him a good bit. If he can't get the Allen, he can't get the Wilson, you want to be a little bit different in tournaments. He's going to grab some ownership as well, too. We're seeing about 10% or so on FanDuel. Herbert as well against Vegas. They're asking in the chat right now. What's up, chat? Like and subscribe here. Do appreciate that. They're asking about Keenan Allen, and if you missed the top of the show, he's expected to be fine. Expected to play. That's the last we saw. It's a late game. Make sure to check the actives and inactives. He did pass his COVID test. He still has a throat apparently, but as far as we know, last we heard, he should be fine. Watson, Herbert, Murray, who do you want to talk about?
I mean, any of these guys, I mean, they're all always in play every week. I mean, Watson's easy because we already seen him play Jacksonville and throw for a season high 359 yards, over 10 yards per pass attempt in that game. Jacksonville, too, and you just look at this team, they're just a team that can't pressure the quarterback. They're actually 12th in the NFL in blitz rate, but they are 32nd in sacks, and they're last in the league in sack rate on the season. So they're trying to dial up pressure. And just they can't get home. It's just a defense that just can't. They're just so bad against the pass. I mean, they're in the bottom third in EPA allowed passing. They're 30th in passing points allowed per game to opposing quarterbacks. It's just an easy spot for Watson. We know we always like to play those guys with some mobility. I think Kyler's cool too because the same reason, kind of like Lamar. Like when you see like the Miami defense and their overall production, it's it doesn't seem like a favorable matchup for Kyler Murray. But when you look at the quarterbacks Miami's face, and you can kind of tell yourself a story that again we would like to see them punch up against some of these better quarterbacks as well. They also had a tough time stopping the run. Granted it was in week 1, but they didn't stop Cam Newton from running the football. One of the mobile quarterbacks they faced. Also Kyler Murray, the past 4 weeks has been really good. I mean, Arizona in totality, they're number 1 in the NFL in yards per play the past 4 weeks, and Kyler Murray went from averaging 9.3 yards per completion to 13.3 yards per completion, which is a league high over the past month. So Murray's playing really well. I also just feel like he's like a tough guy to prepare for anyways. He's got that unique running style. Davis Maddock, when I was on him, called him like Allen Iverson of quarterbacks. I kind of like that. He almost does like his juke move almost is kind of like a crossover, in a sense. He does like that little high knee, high step, the little stutter step. I mean, we can play those guys anytime. People know to play these guys. They know how to play Herbert. Are there any of these like cheapies that you're looking to get? I heard you mention Drew Lock. Is he someone you're going to put in some high exposure to?
Yeah, I mean, begrudgingly, I don't want to play him on FanDuel. I don't think I have to play him on FanDuel, but on DK, where the cap is a little bit tighter, and the price difference matters even more at 5.2K. That's a big enough drop off where I can do something with that. 1.5K give or take. I can upgrade a couple spots, and he's in a dome. The matchup is good. He's got ready-made receivers that are fairly cheap as well too. I still believe in the talent of Judy. I know Judy's been an air yards guy. Fant looks legit, and at a position tight end that's pretty barren, pretty thin, and his price is pretty reasonable, especially on DK where I think it's 4.8. So I'm gonna play some. I make more than one cash lineup. I usually make 3 or so, and I haven't made them yet. I'm still kind of debating. I'm not locked in at anything, but that wasn't a pun or anything. But I'm probably gonna play some Drew Lock at least in one of those, and just kind of get a 3v3, just a different shuffle. Do you think we can trust him against this bad Atlanta defense?
I mean, trust is tough to go that far because I mean, it is still. I mean, we've seen Drew Lock have one productive fantasy game this season, and it came in a situation where they were chasing 21 points in the second half. It's not like it was like they came out and they were throwing the ball around and we could trust him. It was like basically, they're coerced into this situation, and he needed even a last second touchdown to get the third touchdown pass. But I mean, Atlanta's allowing a league high 21.9 passing points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They've allowed 300 yards passing in every game outside of that Carolina game, which was rain soaked in the second half. Teddy was fine in the first half of that game, and the second half, struggled and got knocked out for a couple drives. It's tough. Drew Lock is a guy who still enters this week with more interceptions and touchdown passes. So he definitely does take a step of faith, but you talked about the price, the potential of getting the 300-yard bonus, a game where they're going to have to probably match points. And they may even trail in this game. And since Atlanta's fired Dan Quinn, they've led for 59% of their snaps. That's the 8th highest rate in the league. They've only trailed for 25% of their snaps, which is the 8th fewest, lowest rate in the league. So Atlanta, as home favorites, could hold here and force the Broncos to kind of throw. And we like some of the pieces there, like Fant and Judy moving outside last week could be a big boon to be ahead on that. He's really cheap on both sites. And then you get to run this back with Julio, probably without Calvin Ridley. And we talked about Julio on Wednesday. The 3 games he's played without Calvin Ridley, he has had 20 targets, 15 targets, and 13 targets. And this is a guy that's already getting double-digit targets per game anyways in the construct of the Atlanta offense. So, I mean, there's a chance for Julio to really push. Even no one ever likes to play Julio because they're like, well, I'm not going to get a touchdown. I don't want to play him. But there's a good chance he pushes 15 targets in this game today.
Yeah, I like Julio a good bit, and we'll talk about the receivers soon enough. A couple of random dudes in the chat that are being thrown out there. Any Kyle Allen love? Like, love would not be the adjective I would use for him. I can't do it, but whatever. I hear you. I can't play everybody. I don't make 150 lineups. This is not what I do. Eric Johnson in the chat throughout. Kirk Cousins, which is an interesting move because people talk about leverage and they'll dig into that more in their shows after us, obviously. But Dalvin Cook's gonna be one of those popular plays in the slate, and the common
leverage,
thought.
Baby.
Say it again.
I said leverage, baby.
Yeah. Like Minnesota, if they had their druthers, they would throw the ball like 17 times. But who knows what's going to happen in this game? And it's interesting, Stafford, nobody's going to play Stafford because the whole week people are like, well, Stafford's got COVID or he's up for the COVID test or whatever. And we're going to play Daniel. And that's it. Like, okay, Stafford's back. They just forget. Like, well, Hey, he's facing Minnesota in a dome and they're pretty terrible too. So he's currently projected at 3% ownership on DK right now. Just an interesting tournament play for sure. You got any thoughts? We got to move on and talk running back. But any thoughts as far as Stafford? Cousins was thrown out there. Mahomes, we shouldn't neglect. He's like the best quarterback in the world.
Yeah,
like, I'm sure you can play him. Who's worth focusing on before we move on?
Yeah, early in the week, Minnesota-Detroit was a game I had like earmarked and put some notes down about, potentially stacking this game. And the Stafford news hit, and like you said, it's almost like you removed it out of sight, out of mind. Games in Minneapolis so far have averaged 67 combined points per game. So they're getting there. Those games in the dome there in Minnesota. Stafford, we lose Kenny Golladay, and we've seen the splits he had with Kenny Golladay with and without kind of start the season. 8 yards per pass attempt, 10 flat A dot with Kenny Golladay in the lineup, just a 9-yard average depth of target without Golladay, 7.2 yards per pass attempt without Golladay to start the season. But we got another, potential spot to maybe talk ourselves into Marvin Jones. Minnesota's down now to they've lost 3 starting cornerbacks. They lost Cameron Dantzler last week, so they're really banged up on the back end. Detroit, we know we can always pass on. When the time comes, you can always be run on too, which is why everyone's gravitated to Dalvin Cook. And Dalvin Cook's like the only top tier running back to really like successfully pay up for in cash this week. He's like the only guy you feel tremendously good about. There's like really no pivot, but in tournaments, like there's direct leverage play to play Kirk Cousins with one or both Vikings guys, maybe get cute with Irv Smith, run it back to Marvin Jones or a Hawkinson, who is a really good play. And Hawkinson has really been surging. I mean, even last week when Golladay left the game, he saw a season high 24% team target share. He's had at least 50 yards receiving in 5 of his 7 games this season. And he's tied for the NFL tight end lead in end zone targets this season. So Hawkinson's a tremendous play now that Stafford's back on the board. I think that game does have a really intriguing, stacking appeal. You just need the Vikings not to get out to an early lead. Because they have shown the propensity to, we are willing to just live on 20 pass attempts. We do not care. If you want to let us live that way, we will. And that's kind of what we want to do. But as a tournament pivot, like absolutely, there's a lot of leverage to be gained here, especially on Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I mean, good segue to running backs. Obviously, Dalvin Cook is just jumping off the page there. Seems like a really, really good spend up, a really good building block for your cash games, assuming you can get there. He is a little bit pricey. Chase Edmonds, I don't think they priced him up enough, right? Like the matchup here against Miami should be ahead. He's a home favorite. Drake is out of the picture. You'd assume he gets a big chunk of it. They priced him up to some degree. And he also, passes the eye test, if you want to say that. He looks good in the uniform, looks good in the field. And I think he's 20, 25 touches here against Miami. He seems another guy, just lock and load in my cash games. I'll figure it out as far as tournaments. What say you?
Oh yeah, he's hard to get away from it on any level, especially just as a building block, like you said. I mean, we've already seen him we don't really have to project him as a lead back because we've seen it last year. He had a chance to start last year against the Giants. He played 91% of the snaps. He had 29 touches that game, had the 3 touchdowns. So everyone always loves that when we've seen it hit. And then if you look at this Cardinals depth chart behind him, the only guys that they're going to have active today are Jonathan Ward, who's played 3 total snaps all season, undrafted or 7th round draft pick, Eno Benjamin, who has yet to dress for a game this season. So, I mean, there's not a lot behind him that we've seen that guys take the field for Arizona. So it projects to be a high workload game for him. Kenyon Drake was already getting 18 touches per game. So, if we can apply some transitive property to getting those touches plus some of his workload that from his role inherently, we're well over 20 touches as a home favorite. No weather concerns against the team that's allowing 149 yards from scrimmage to opposing backfields, which is 22nd in the league, which is genuinely hard to get away from. And we know if somehow Miami, does, do what they did last week, maybe they get a defensive score, they go up. I mean, he's got pass catching ability too. So we're not even genuinely concerned. So, I mean, it's hard to get away from at those prices. He's actually and it's surprisingly, he's cheaper on FanDuel than DK, which is pretty wild.
So Pittsburgh should absolutely wallop the Cowboys. It's one of those things we get this every once in a while. Like the matchup is almost too good, and if it's too good, like what happens in the third and fourth quarter? The Cowboys are professionals and they're paid, and Garrett Gilbert's going to be suiting up. I think he was an AAF quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound correct?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the passing leader, the AAF passing leader.
Orlando something, maybe like the Rough Rider. I don't know what it is. I think the Orlando affiliate there for the AAF. I don't believe he's ever started an NFL game, and yeah, so in theory, this sets up nicely against a terrible Dallas team. 29 team total. Somebody's going to get there, and it's interesting. We didn't even talk about Roethlisberger. Like every quarterback gets there versus the Cowboys too. And,
mm-hmm.
Like it's just like, how do you bring it back with Dallas? It's just a weird thing. We don't know what's going to happen with Elliott either. Not that you're playing Elliott, I don't think either way. Yeah. So James Conner is one of the feels like a really, really solid play. I like him a little more on DK than he is on FanDuel as far as the asking price, but trying to make them both work, and then. If you can sort of branch out into the David Johnson conversation, I've heard different theories, and the coach has thrown out a couple times that we want to get Duke Johnson involved. Again, good matchup here against Jacksonville. David Johnson just seems like a different guy from a couple of years ago. Just not a fun roster, but in theory he should be fine, but I don't know what his ceiling is. Amongst those two, you have any thoughts to expand? Because they're both in my pool, and especially David Johnson, I just don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit it. Like he's just fine. I mean, he's actually he's had a really high floor all season. He's had just like kind of one bad game, but he hasn't shown a high ceiling. He's only had 100 yards from scrimmage in just one of his past 6 games. That was against Jacksonville, though, the team he's playing today, where he rushed for 96 yards. He had added 7 yards receiving. He's running a ton of pass routes, though. He just hasn't. Watson is just pushing the ball to the wide receivers. He's not throwing to the running backs. But he's third in the league in opportunities inside the 5-yard line. So he does have some, touchdown upside as well. And then running backs have averaged a, league high 31.6 touches per game against the Jaguars this season. So you've got like a more or less fine volume based play. He's got touchdown equity. He is involved in the pass game from a route perspective. The targets just aren't there. I mean, like you said, he's just never fun, but objectively he checks all the boxes we kind of look for, except for being at home. He fits that mold. Conner, I mean, is a really strong play. He's the problem with Conner is where he's priced on both sites. You have to get there with him from a touchdown perspective and the 100-yard bonus, because he's not catching passes this year. His receiving is way down from what he was from his career rates. And then, the Pittsburgh, we've seen them kind of call off the dogs a few weeks ago when they were up big on the Browns, only attempted 22 passes, got Benny Snell in for basically like a whole quarter and a half of that game. So you're going to have to get there early, I think, with Conner. He still can. I mean, this is a game. He could have multiple touchdowns this game, but you're probably not going to get a ton of receiving, a lot of receiving points from him. I mean, it's a running back against the Cowboys, and a running back that's been good since week 1. I mean, he literally has been, he's gone over 100 total yards in 4 of 6 games since leaving that week 1 game. And the only 2 games he didn't were against the Ravens and the Eagles, 2 of the top run defenses in the league. And in those weeks, he still got there from a fantasy perspective. He still got in the box both of those weeks.
Derrick Henry's good. You can play him. I don't know how much I'm going to get just because it doesn't only work. I think Chicago's got a pretty legit defense. Another guy doesn't catch the ball. Of course, he can run for 150 and 2 touchdowns, and who cares how many times he catches the ball? He gets there that way. Robinson, I don't know what to do with Robinson. He's a guy that I think the field likes more than me. The Jacksonville quarterback change. Luton doesn't look like anything special. I guess he's an interesting bring back for Fuller, I suppose, or an interesting bring back for if you're playing Watson with Fuller, something like that. But my thought process is Houston's going to be ahead, so I don't know if that works that way. Of course, Robinson can catch the ball a good bit as well too. And then I'm a big volume over talent guy, volume and opportunity over talent. Except for David Montgomery, he breaks that rule. He's another guy. I'm more excited to roster David Johnson than I am about David Montgomery. He's my least favorite person to roster, but. I'm running optimals. I'm running some lineups in lineup HQ, and he keeps popping up. And I'm like, I don't want to see him, but he's plenty cheap, and he probably touches the ball 18, 20 times. What do I do with this guy?
Yeah, he definitely is in that mold. I mean, ever since the Panthers game, though, like I'm just not gonna get talked into it from a matchup perspective because we know the target or the opportunities, like you said, are always gonna be there. He now leads the NFL in percentage of backfield touches, 87% of his backfield touches, but he's averaging just 4.5 yards per touch. And like I said, I just go back to that Carolina game. Like he had all the opportunity in the world against, and the matchup was screaming, for us to play him, and he just meandered his way through the game like he did. He's tough like that. I also do like David Johnson a little bit more than David Montgomery. I think just when I look at David Montgomery, he's more of these guys. Like I think he's like a fine season long guy, but when we talk about DFS perspective, he's got to be like. He's got to be so cheap to make me, or in a week where like I have to need his fifth, where his salary was like needed this week, and I just don't think it is.
Antonio Gibson's a guy I'm much more excited about rostering. Maybe he gets a little more touches as well too. We shall see coming back from the bye. Jacobs I didn't really talk about. Of course, you can play Jacobs as well. Justin Jackson, especially on DK at 4.9, that's pretty interesting to me. What the guy? I can't remember the guy's name. The guy that like took all siphoned like 10 touches.
Yeah, Troy Maine Pope.
Yeah, he's not playing this week. Kelly's still lurking, obviously. They seem to like Jackson more. You're always dropping ridiculous stats. I can't remember which podcast I was listening to, but you probably already know this with the chat. So I think not one red zone carry this year for Justin Jackson. That seems concerning, but he's really
kind of like the way I look at this situation with Justin Jackson is who, since Austin Eckler has been out, he's actually led the backfield in yards from scrimmage in all 3 games from a yardage perspective. So, and he's been efficient with his touches, but he's kind of like his situation is very similar to the Bills situation. He's kind of like Chargers Devin Singletary, but with more pass catching, equity. He's probably not going to score unless it's from distance. If they get inside the 5, they're going to probably bring in Kelly. So I mean that's what's always tough because in these tournaments he can still at 4.9 I think get you value. Like he's a way to get 15 plus PPR points still. I think it's a lot tougher on FanDuel where you're talking about like even if he gets like 110 yards in scrimmage but without a touchdown on FanDuel, it doesn't do as much for you when you're getting full PPR points and you're getting it over on DK. He can sell it some for value because I think he's probably a low odds to score a touchdown. That's the biggest problem. We play in these tournaments where at least want to find an avenue to where guys can crash a ceiling too. We don't mind playing some of these cheap guys for just value and maxing out their salary, but we also want to be able to have like in the range of outcomes for guys to score touchdowns too, because touchdowns win tournaments. And that's kind of where like the bridge is. And the thing is, like I said, we talked about this week where we had some moving pieces and it looks like we won't get Pollard, at least not until maybe a potential late swap situation where we're going to have a really group of running backs, like kind of in that area. We talked about Dobbins a little bit. You've hinted at who did we just gloss over? DJ Dallas. You got like a lot of guys in this ballpark of salary on both sites that you're going to have to pick and choose from because they're hard to pick them all. And if you're like me, I limit my player pool. I'm typically playing 6 to 8 running backs a weekend. I'm not going to just try to stretch myself out and cover every base. But Justin Jackson is in my player pool on DraftKings, but not FanDuel.
Yeah, that's mostly where I'm at as well too. Much like I'm more in DK. And let's talk about that Seattle situation. Dallas had a great box score game last week, fantasy point game, but like he wasn't efficient. He was like pretty terrible actually, but he scored twice, scoreboard. And then Homer is healthier and Alex Collins is lurking and you have Carroll saying he trusts Collins, whatever that's worth. But, Carroll's kind of a confirmed liar. Like, you never really know what he's going to give you. And then there's the Miami situation. I see people in chat talking about Miami and, Pete Overs, that's super excited about, the Laird season potentially. Jordan Howard might get his like 2 carries and 2 touchdowns and 2 yards. That may happen. Who knows? There's a person named Salvan Ahmed. I never heard of this guy until like a day ago.
Yeah,
he may be a guy in Miami that does something. Are these all traps? Because again, the cap is pretty tight, and the one that's most like potentially cash game playable is DJ Dallas. But like, what percent of that backfield does he get? It's my understanding he's not a great pass blocker, which can be a concerning. What do we expect of that Seattle backfield and the Miami backfield?
Yeah, the Miami backfield, I'm just not touching. It's great. This screams like a game where like like 6 or 7 dudes from Miami are going to have like a carry. Like, I mean, Lynn Bowden's not going to play because of COVID, but they're going to be forced to give Jordan Howard some touches. They'll probably like they might use like Jakeem Grant. You might see have multiple carries in this game. Malcolm Perry, if he plays, like it could be a game where just like it's a hodgepodge of usage. And we know if anyone gets inside the 5, if Jordan Howard's active, like he'll probably be that guy. He's got 18 carries for 14 yards on the season.
Is that his actual stat line? That's amazing. That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not going to touch the Miami situation. I mean, Godspeed to anyone who does. The Seattle one is a little more intriguing because it's one in a game we're stacking already. Like we already want to play pieces of that game. And then, he's a guy too. Like if they do get inside the 5 though, like even with Homer maybe playing more in 7 snaps than he did a week ago, like Dallas has got to be the favorite to get the goal line carry though, if they do have goal line carry. He did run a pass route on 77% of the team dropbacks last week and had, the 5 carries. I think very similarly about DJ Dallas, like I do David Montgomery, like you did. So it's like if I want to play David Montgomery, I'm just going to play DJ Dallas. I feel very similarly. So you just get the salary relief. I think he's a lot better play on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings, even with the 5 catches, just because I don't think he's going to be really efficient. I don't think you're going to get either bonus. You're really just looking for that touchdown. And I think that's a lot more palatable at 5-1, the way you can build rosters on FanDuel than it is on DK, where you can go cheaper and play a guy like Justin Jackson. Justin Jackson, maybe without a touchdown, even outscores DJ Dallas by a good amount. If DJ Dallas doesn't have a touchdown in this game, then Justin Jackson without a touchdown probably has even a chance to triple up, DJ Dallas. But Buffalo's not a matchup we're scared about. I mean, they're allowing 17 rushing points per game to opposing backfields. That's 26th in the NFL. 4.5 yards per carry. It's 21st. So we're not scared. It's a high team total. We know Seattle's going to score points. So I mean, DJ Dallas is he's in there, man. I'm gonna have some DJ Dallas today.
I think I am too, but begrudgingly, I don't know what to expect. I feel like he can get like 3 or 4 points or 17 points, and we'll see. But it's a cheap way to get a piece of the game that we both like, obviously. You probably see that the link drop there in chat on YouTube. Like and subscribe. We do appreciate that. Hit that link. You get yourself $5 off your first month of RG Premium, Core 4. And that includes baseball, football, basketball, and golf. Basketball starting up next month, I believe. Super excited about that. It's like it didn't even pause. Also want to mention monkey knife fights. Some more states have ratified gambling, of course, the whole process, but plenty of states out there let you partake in monkey knife fight. You get yourself 3 months free of RG Premium with your first deposit, and you also get 100% deposit bonus up to $50 if you use the promo code Grinders. That's a segue to receivers because I picked a couple, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. You're picking the over, picking the under. Tyler Lockett, 75.5 yards. I got the over on that. I'm the chalk. I just give me the over on everything. I trust Will Fuller. I think he's going to get loose today against Jacksonville. My apologies. The rain came early. Hopefully it's not too distracting. It's been on and off all day, but that's what's going on here in Florida. But Will Fuller over 63.5 yards. You want to see the narrative, like, hey, you're still my guy, or just, hey, the matchup's really good. I like him a good bit. So those are 2 plays that I like in monkey knife fight. Your thoughts on Fuller and Lockett before we expand to the position as a whole?
Yeah, I love those guys. And we talked about Watson and, being able to play Watson. I love both the Houston wide receivers in general. And you can play them together too. It's a situation where I think you can double stack both of those guys as well against that Jaguar secondary that is pretty deplorable. And Fuller has had a great floor. He's one of those guys that, we say he's not just reliant on the, 150 yards as opposed to like the 30 yards. We're not getting that like discrepancy this year. He's scoring touchdowns. We love that. Brandon Cooks actually, though, has more targets than him. I feel like the price difference between Cooks and Fuller is still something that you can take advantage of. Because they're starting to be used on nearly like equal terms in terms of opportunity in the offense. And then the pricing is still just so far apart between the two. There's such a big gap from Fuller and Brandon Cooks. And we already saw Brandon Cooks smash the Jaguars for 160 yards. But even since that point, he had the 8 for 161. Then he had 9 for 68 in a touchdown and then 7 catches for 60 yards. So it's not just like he had that 1 week and went back away. Like Brandon Cooks found some stability as well. So, I mean, I like Brandon Cooks a lot, too, in that game. That I would like that game a lot more if we just knew what we were going to get from Jake Luton and on any level. I will say that one thing, if you're a Houston defensive streamer, which I think is fine, that Luton, the one thing that he didn't do in college was turn the ball over. He was 97th percentile on touchdown to interception rate as all prospects coming into the NFL draft since 2000. Just threw 3 interceptions his final year at Oregon State. Does that mean anything? Does it mean he can't throw an interception today? Of course not. But Houston's a team that doesn't pressure the quarterback, so it'd be interesting to see if you don't get sacks and you don't get turnovers if the Houston defense can get there for you. But I do like that both the receivers in that game a lot. I just wish we knew a run back spot. You said maybe James Robinson. I wish we could know if we could trust DJ Shark with Bradley Roby out. Laviska Shenault's just kind of, a guy that just doesn't quite get there. He's like always intriguing enough to where you're looking at Laviska Shenault and his usage, and he just doesn't quite get over the hump, and he still doesn't have an end zone target on the season too, which makes it kind of tricky. But that game as a whole, that Jacksonville side is just really hard to kind of grasp what you're going to be able to kind of get on the run back side.
One of our premium shows, I heard Escott throw out the possibility of maybe Shenault is a little bit of wildcat. I think every single game this year, he's ran the ball at least once, to the exception of one game. And like Luton, who's Luton? And he's kind of like, Shenault can do everything. I don't know if he can throw the ball or not, but I thought it was an interesting thought. Just kind of throwing it out there. Just kind of popped in my head when you mentioned him. Diggs, of course, against Seattle. Pops is a great play. Jones, nice play against Denver in the dome, with the exception of Ridley, assuming he's out as well. Absolutely, you could play Metcalf. Like it was Metcalf week last week. Now it's Lockett week. At least that's the way it's projected. And I know you don't obsess over quarterback matchup, but White presumably was going to be on Metcalf, make it a little more difficult. But for sure in tournaments, and if you look at the ownership, it makes a ton of sense to place a Metcalf in tournaments. The Detroit situation. How do you feel about Marvin Jones? All the Marvins. Anybody interesting there in the Detroit side?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen Marvin Hall kind of get all those air yards and those big, deep targets last week. We love him. I mean, Minnesota's giving up a ton of splash plays. Obviously, he takes a step of faith and is more of just a game block. It's someone like if you're game blocking that game, that's a guy you would look to. Marvin Jones, we did this to start the season. He didn't quite get there for us. The matchup lines up again. The Vikings, they Will Fuller, DK Metcalf, Julio Jones, Devontae Adams, all those guys had top 10 scoring weeks. I would assume that you would read those names off and say, yeah, those guys are a lot better than Marvin Jones too. But even at his pricing, a top 20 week can still, be kind of worth it instead of a top 10 week. Not huge target shares though, even with Kenny Galladay out for Marvin Jones. I mean, the first 2 weeks he had just 18% of the team targets. It wasn't like Galladay was out and then he was just kind of vacuuming up opportunity and didn't hit. Like he just didn't really even have a lot of opportunity either in those games. But I mean, great matchup inside. It's hard to just completely fade Marvin Jones as well. In that side, I do like Hawkinson more. I think Hawkinson is the best play of the Lions pass catchers. If you forced me to pick a guy outside of just game blocking, taking shots in the Marvins.
Chris Otten in chat, he says, wild prediction, healthy John Brown goes off for Seattle, breaks the slate with everyone on Diggs. And I like some Brown for tournaments as well too. And then we have somebody else jumping in there and say, well, what about Cole Beasley? And it feels like Brown's more the home run hitter and Beasley's more like the safe. He's going to get you 5 and 50, maybe he gets in the box or something like that. Do you have
He's cheaper than Beasley, which is crazy. John Brown's actually on DraftKings. Beasley's more expensive.
Yeah, I think Beasley's like $200 cheaper on FanDuel, but the prices are pretty similar.
But you don't want to play Beasley on FanDuel.
I mean, not in theory, you don't. Yeah, his touchdown equity is not spectacular, and but it's a tight pinch as far as my wide receiver 3 there. If I want to get Cook, if I want to get Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh defense, which looks phenomenal today. Maybe we'll touch on that soon enough, but they're playing. We kind of mentioned how Pittsburgh is well positioned against the Cowboys, and they should just rack up all the sacks in the world and some turnovers and a whole deal. And we know it's a high variance position, but it feels like a really, really solid play. But again, they're pretty pricey. DK are 4.9, 5K on FanDuel, 21 on Yahoo. So if you pick one of Beasley versus Brown, it sounds like you're on the Brown, and I assume he's healthy. He's practiced, I think, in full the last 2 days, correct?
Yeah, and he ran a pass route on 96% of the team dropbacks last week. I have no problem, though, if anyone does like Beasley. You look at slot receivers against Seattle. I mean, still, Seattle has been an equal opportunity giving defense to opposing wide receivers. The average wide receiver one line against wide receivers is 9 catches for 115 yards. So, I mean, it's really easy to like Diggs and roll that over, especially with Diggs' usage the past month. His air yards and team share of targets have just gone bonkers. They've gone haywire. They've really just been jamming him with opportunities the past month. But if you're playing on DK, Russell Gage 9 for 114, Julian Edelman 8 for 179, Larry Fitzgerald 8 for 62, CeeDee Lamb 5 for 65. Double-digit PPR points are there to be had for Cole Beasley, and if you get a touchdown, you're really looking great there. I do like John Brown too. He's more of a more volatile, but Seattle, it's one of the big play guys. You're getting a home run. If Brown hits, he's going to hit probably for a long touchdown, which is what we like. At his pricing, him just being a little bit cheaper too than Beasley is just makes it a little more intriguing, just because you get a little more flexibility. But I think he will be kind of popular today. I didn't check. I wanted to circle back after last night, but I saw his projected ownership was still like he wasn't sliding through the cracks.
3K crapper on DK. Again, tight bench as far as the salary. Are they all traps? Marcus Johnson, not this great matchup against Baltimore, but presumably he gets a good bit of run. No T.Y. Hilton, thankfully. Steven Sims expected back today versus the Giants is 3K. So there's some talent there. The dude for Atlanta, I'm losing his name for some reason. Jakeem Grant, you mentioned him before. He's 3K as well. Do you have a preference amongst these guys?
I think if I was going to go in on any of those guys, which I'm not, by the way, just to tell you, just none of those guys made it for me this week. Because I just don't, I didn't really have the need to say like, well, I have to jam in these top two guys. I think each tier offers a guy that you can get to. But I think Marcus Johnson would be probably my favorite out of those guys, just because, if T.Y. Hilton's not going to play, he was already a guy getting more targets and air yards than Hilton anyways. And then when you talk about the Ravens COVID situation on the back end, with the kind of their cornerback, room, some of their depth kind of maybe potentially being exposed, to take a shot on him. But I think it's tough. All those options I think are tough. I wish the Atlanta situation we had further clarity, like who was actually playing Ridley's position, because Olamide Zaccheaus played Julio's position when Julio was out. But is it, going to be a guy like, Christian Blake that plays for him or something like that? I think it's a lot tougher. And last time we did the Zaccheaus thing, it was, they're just going to, Julio's going to get a bunch of targets. They're going to throw the ball at Julio.
And maybe Hurst. Maybe Hurst gets some catches as well, too. That's a good segue to tight end. Unless you want to knock out a couple of receivers. We have about 6 minutes or so before he steps aside and make way for Grant Neefer. If you guys missed Grant on this show, he'll be on in the next show. And I believe he's coming back next Sunday with another three-man booth with him and Cardi. I think that's what the schedule said. Stick around for that. Tambo and Grant. And then, of course, you got Tuttle, Christie, and Raw taking you guys all at the lock. So give me if there's another receiver or so you want to feel free to throw out there. If there's plenty, you can play a bunch of guys. Can't talk about everybody. But feel free to segue to tight ends.
Yeah, absolutely. I still think that Henry Ruggs is like a decent, like deep dart where he's at. He ran a passer on 90% of the team dropbacks. I think it was a season high. And if we think that game has a potential to shoot out, like just to, he'd be a guy I'd look to kind of, potentially, maybe hit on one for us today. But Brian Edwards looks like he's going to be active too. So it kind of takes away a little bit from Aguilar. Potentially, where he's priced. But we can jump into tight ends. I already mentioned Hawkinson. That same game, that Chargers game, I know that it's been frustrating that, Justin Herbert's been playing so well and that everyone seemingly scores a touchdown but Hunter Henry and 100 yards. But his price, man, at like $4K for a guy that, for a quarterback that's running as hot as Herbert is, to just completely ignore, to say like, well, he hasn't gotten there, so I'm just going to ignore him. Like, it hasn't happened. But he's still running a passer on 80% of the Chargers dropbacks. That's 6th among all tight ends in the NFL. And like Herbert's playing so well. And then you look at the tight ends against the Raiders, the past 3 games that they've played, they have a lot of tight end one options. So, I think I don't want to ignore him yet. I don't want to completely write off Hunter Henry. I know it's been frustrating. You kind of hit on Noah Fant in the dome. I think that game just offers a lot of unique stacking opportunity. You could play Fant, you could play Judy, you could run it back with Julio. The Falcons have just been, horrible against tight ends to start the season. They're 29th in yards per target allowed to the position. They've allowed a league-high 8 touchdowns. And we've yet to see Fant have that, like, we know he has that George Kittle-ish after-the-catch ability where he turns one of these 7 catches into a 35-yard gain or 40-yard gain. It really hasn't happened, but last week he was fully healthy. He played 78% of the snaps. So it was his highest total since week 3 before he had the ankle injury. So he's fully healthy. He's inside against a team that hasn't stopped tight ends. We're kind of semi-talking ourselves into Drew Lock being a potentially good play. So Drew Lock's going to get there. Some people have to get there with him too. So, those are the 3 guys I'm looking at to kind of, shape up my core tight end exposure today.
Yeah, the position stuff can be a little bit noisy, especially like who you played against as far as tight ends, because you can be playing against Kelsey and Andrews and like good tight ends. Well, I don't know if Andrews is good, you know what I mean? I'm just bitter. He's my one season long team. He's been terrible of late. But as far as fantasy points yielded, yeah, no team has given up more fantasy points, DK points, FanDuel points, I think all the points to tight ends. So and he's well positioned in the dome. I like him a good bit. Ingram, I like him on Yahoo, especially where he's like $12, 19 targets the last 2 weeks. No Golden Tate. I guess it's worth mentioning. I think Shepard's kind of interesting too as a cheapie. Not that I love the Giants today. And I don't know if we mentioned Keenan Allen. We kind of mentioned him in passing, but I'm not a throat doctor. But coming into today before the news, I loved him. He's one of my favorite receivers this week. I don't know what to do with him. Maybe we're going to galaxy brain it. I have no idea. I'm probably going to have some still, possibly in cash. And I don't know. It's unfair to ask you what you're going to do. Like, what are you going to base that off of? Like, we don't know. But I guess he's fine. I don't know. Do you need a throat to play football? It helps. If it hurts, I don't know. Anything else as far as tight ends? Yeah, we got a minute or two before we step aside to get out of here. So
that's pretty much covers most of those guys. Except I'm building my 3 core guys are those 3 that I named: Hunter Henry, Noah Fant, and TJ Hawkinson.
Give me a couple stacks that you're working on, or maybe a game stack, maybe just a quarterback receiver, something that you're sort of building around. You're starting with as far as a tournament lineup today.
Well, I mentioned the Atlanta-Denver stack. I like that. I like the Ravens offense. I like Lamar. I like Lamar with Hollywood. I like Lamar on his own. I like this Chargers Raiders kind of game block game. So that's where you can play. I think you can play Herbert, Keenan Allen and Hunter Henry. You can run it back with either if you want to run it back with Josh Jacobs or mix in Henry Ruggs. I like that as well. The Houston stack, mentioned them, Watson, Fuller, Cooks, like those guys all a lot. And then if you're going to, game block a game, obviously Seattle Buffalo. And then what's crazy about Seattle Buffalo is there are cheap avenues. We mentioned John Brown. We mentioned DJ Dallas. You can fully game block that game, which is, we often can't do with Seattle and some of these high price games because everyone's typically so expensive. But when you don't have a Chris Carson at, $6K plus or $7K on FanDuel, we've got a cheaper running back, and they're facing a team that offers wide receivers that has one high price wide receiver, but the 2 other guys that they throw the ball to are kind of cheaper. I don't know what we'll do with the running backs. We didn't talk about that, but we're probably not playing any Bills running backs anyways, but Zach Moss would be the only guy that we'd entertain. Those are kind of all the games I'm looking at, kind of for a stacking potential. I do like going back to the person in chat said that Detroit-Minnesota game that people have kind of moved it out of sight, out of mind, and try to. I think I'm going to get off of here and run a little. I'm going to hand build a little stack in that game as well.
Yeah, I definitely like that as well too. And I see Juju good play. Like I like Juju, but like Pittsburgh has so many options. In the old days, it was like stack Brown and Le'Veon Bell, and like you get here's 60 free fantasy points and nobody else touches the ball. Pittsburgh just has
all the Steelers are good plays. Like there's no one's looking at a Steelers player and be like, yeah, that guy's a bad play today. I mean, like I said, you go back to that Browns game, they threw 22 passes that game.
And there's always potential.
There's always a potential there that Ben just doesn't hit you. He's not going to get 30 plus pass attempts. But while they're building that lead, all those guys are good plays. It's just the Steelers receivers are tricky. And wait till we find out after tonight, like what we're going to do with these Buccaneers receivers every week.
Well, the showdown slate. You got to chase the losses from the main slate. Rich, much appreciate you jumping on here. I'm sure the people know, the people are aware, but if they're not aware, tell them where they can find you, where they can follow you, in the whole deal.
Yeah, at sharpfootballanalysis.com is where you can find, the worksheet. I write up, every player of every game. I do a podcast with my buddy Chad Scott, Pre-Snap Motion. I do a Sharp Angles betting and more of a real football take podcast with Cleve TA and Dan Pizzuta. I'm on the Rotogrinders Pick 6 with you, Dean, every Wednesday night at 9:00. I appreciate you guys having me out. I hope everyone has a tremendous week 9. And I hope that the 75-degree weather in Cleveland lasts longer than this weekend.
You enjoy that. Thanks everybody for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. Don't go anywhere because the aforementioned Grant Neefer is going to come on in just a minute. He'll be joined by Tambo. They're going to show off the lineup HQ and dive into tournaments, give you a much more diverse look into that as far as just here's a bunch of plays we like. We're the appetizer. We just open the slate up for the people. He was Rich. I was Dean. This was football. Good luck today. We're out of here. Holler.
here back in the Fantasy Bar. 6 of my favorite plays for week 9 on FanDuel and DraftKings, including a few of my favorite mid-range and value plays. What game am I going to be stacking up, and what running back am I going to have in a majority of my lineups? Belly up to the Fantasy Bar and find out. Welcome in, guys. Beers Daily Fantasy 6-pack week 9. Good to be back here once again in the friendly confines of the Fantasy Bar, talking FanDuel and talking DraftKings with 6 guys fresh off the tap for you, as always. Now, before we get into week 9, guys, do me a favor on YouTube. Guys, click that thumbs up button. That's the tip jar here in the Fantasy Bar. Helps us out a lot over at Rotogrinders, and I greatly appreciate it. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and get notified when these videos are coming out. Now, let's take a quick look back, as always, like we do here in the Fantasy Bar at week 8. And obviously, Dalvin Cook, the headliner here, not going to victory lap guy, not going to take a victory lap on that one. Why? Because the rest of the 6-pack, honestly, very ho-hum. We didn't get the revenge we thought we'd get out of Le'Veon Bell. My flashback to try to make AJ Green work didn't work either. And the rest of the 6-pack, pretty ho-hum. So, hopefully, Dalvin Cook matched up with your research. You had some exposure there, but I am ready to turn the page here to week 9. That's exactly what we're going to do, and we're going to go right back to the running back position, not with Dalvin Cook, although I do like him a lot this week. We're going to go to the mid-range with Antonio Gibson of the Washington football team against the Giants. Almost slipped the Redskins in there on you, but the football team here for Washington. But I love this spot here for Antonio Gibson. Coming off a bye, we saw him have his most productive game as a pro in that game before the bye against that woeful Cowboys defense. And I know that was a big part of it, but 20 carries in that game. And I know he's been splitting pretty much 50-50 on the snaps with J.D. McKissic, but did outcarry him 20-5 in that game. Would like to see more usage in the passing game here out of a guy who played some wide receiver in college. And I know McKissic kind of steals some of that away. But the point is, he's going to get 20 carries here in a home matchup against the Giants. I'm very interested under 6K on DraftKings, just a tad over 6K on FanDuel. This guy's been a touchdown maker. 4 games of the past 6, he has found the end zone here. So the Giants done pretty well against the run here, and I'm seeing very minimal ownership here. We get a guy at home as a favorite. We don't get to say that very often here with Washington, but a guy think we know the upside is there. The ownership will be very minimal. Antonio Gibson going to lead us off here in week 9. All right, let's stay in the cheap seats at wide receiver. We're going to go to Pittsburgh. We're going to roll with DIONTAE Johnson against the Cowboys. So I think what's going to happen here each and every week with these Steelers pass catchers, you never know who it's going to be. You know, you got Chase Claypool having big weeks. We have Juju Smith-Schuster coming into the year, was the alpha. We have DIONTAE Johnson, who we've seen, when healthy, be the most productive of these 3. So we definitely know we want some exposure here. I'm expecting James Conner to be heavily owned at the running back position, so we can find some leverage here against this awful Cowboys D, like we mentioned. And I think this is a spot to do it with. And sometimes it's as simple as me as who's the cheapest of the 3, and I think who will be the lowest owned of the 3. And I think DIONTAE Johnson checks both of those boxes, and he's the lowest price on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So you're getting great value here. And a guy we've seen, like I said, when he's in the lineup, he's been the most productive of these receivers. Really only one bad game when he's played through a whole game. Other than that, it's generally 10 to 12 targets a game. And this Dallas team has had no issues allowing production to this position. 6 most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So again, James Conner probably going to be very chalky here. This Pittsburgh passing game will definitely have some ownership because of this matchup. But DIONTAE Johnson, the guy I think will fall through the cracks, the cheapest of the 3, and potentially the lowest owned, the guy I'm targeting the most here against the Dallas Cowboys. All right, let's go to the quarterback position. A lot of great options this week. We're going to go with Justin Herbert of the Chargers. Now, this guy for a rookie, been very impressive. Him and Joe Burrow just continue to smash each and every week. In fact, Herbert, 3 or more touchdowns now in each of the last 4 games, 14 total touchdowns. Now we got to throw last week away, that windy game. I'm not looking at Baker Mayfield stats here, but I am looking on the season overall, and the Raiders, 8th most fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. That includes those numbers from Mayfield. So it wasn't so windy. This number could be even worse for the Raiders. And we also know Justin Herbert gives you some sneaky rushing upside as well. So you raise the floor. The ceiling has been there. Vegas, 3rd most rushing touchdowns allowed to the quarterback position. So just a little bonus there on Justin Herbert, but the numbers have been phenomenal here. This game, a massive total over 50, a game I want a ton of exposure to, and the main piece I want is Justin Herbert of the Chargers. All right, who do we pair him up with? A lot of options here. We're going to go wide receiver Mike Williams as that pairing here against the Raiders. Now, I love Keenan Allen here as well, no doubt. And I don't even mind the double stack here. I think there's enough production and enough volume for both of these guys to go around. But Keenan Allen checking in as one of the highest owned receivers on the week here. So let's either do the double stack, which a lot of people don't like doing, or better yet, let's just go with Mike Williams here on his own. We know that Raiders defense has struggled against the pass. We talked about it with Justin Herbert, but 27 in DVOA this season against the pass are the Raiders, and we've seen huge spike games out of Mike Williams, including big 30-point game against the Saints, 20 in that game last week. So he's a guy we know can go big on the salary, a 5, a 6, a 7x return here in a potential shootout. Love the pairing of Justin Herbert and big Mike Williams here against Las Vegas. All right, who do we run it back with? I like that game so much, we're going to stay there for one more play. We're going to go to tight end and run it back with Darren Waller of the Raiders. So he's the guy I want on the other side. I think some Josh Jacobs is probably in play here as well. Some people may try to target Henry Ruggs. Okay with that, but Waller, really the guy that stands out. And the guy I want to go back to. Again, we kind of tossed last week out, not taking much out of that game with 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds. This is a guy getting a ton of targets in this offense. And even in that win game, saw 6 targets, but averaging almost 9 targets a game. He is the alpha here in this offense, and against this Chargers defense, this is a position I want to attack. The Chargers have really had troubles with the tight end position. Bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed so far this season. Price is fair. Yes, normally we want a cheap tight end, and there are certainly some options out there, but if we're stacking this game, Waller, the guy I want to run it back with. Again, prices are fair. Matchup is there. Darren Waller, my favorite tight end here in week 9. All right, it's time to take a look at my favorite play for week 9. But before we do that, guys, as always, the Beast of the Week contest rolls on, absolutely free to play. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button. All you have to do, get in the comment section of the video and guess fantasy points on DraftKings for my Beast of the Week. The closest guess will win themselves either a free week of Rotogrinders Premium, and that's going to give you access to everything, and not only football, it's going to give you some golf as well. We got some big tournaments coming up, so get a chance to peek behind the curtain there if you're not a member, or if you already are a loyal subscriber, and we thank you for that, we'll send you a free Rotogrinders t-shirt. So without further ado, let's take a look. My favorite play for week 9, you know I'm at Beast of the Week. All right, Beast time. We owe you one more running back. Again, Dalvin Cook, kind of an easy automatic play. Love him in this spot against the Lions. We're going to go to Arizona. We're going to go.
What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka Toe Tag and Tambo, back for another edition of the Sunday Lineup HQ show, leading up till about 40 minutes before lock, and then Kevin Roth, Christy, those guys will come on. So I got another good guest this week. They keep hooking me up. The 32-year-old from some basement, the throat doctor, Grant. What's happening, my man? How you doing?
Big fan of the nickname, the throat doctor. I'm doing good. It's I've been up for many hours looking at this slate, and a lot of my stuff from early on in the week is pretty much the same, but finding some decent spots where I think that people are going to largely overlook stuff. And it's a fun slate. And just because I don't normally mass enter on DK, but decided because of the show, why not throw 50 lineups in? We'll put in some different things into the lineup builder as we're going along in the show, so you guys will know pretty much what I'm playing in my MMEs.
That's perfect, man. I know normally you're on the show before this, so as much as you've been up, I think it was putting in some N64 time, as you mentioned in the chat there and before the show. So, excited to be on with you.
Nothing's better.
I'm not sure how the dynamic will go, because every show I see you on, I'm used to you just making fun of Dean the whole time. So this will be a little bit different.
Easy to do.
We love Dean. We love Dean. Dean's the man. Shout out Dean. But yeah, let's hop into this. Week by week, we go through it, Grant, here. It's going to be a little bit different this week. I think we're going to shake it up. We're going to start with running back, there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's some, big chalk plays. There's some decisions to be made. And I think that will just lead nicer into what our quarterback plays look like and how we stack up. And is there some leverage positions here, of course, that we'll get to, and then maybe how we can implement those into the lineup HQ builder. So let's start with running back. Let's start at the top. I know like you said, you've got some conviction this week, some hot takes maybe, but we got Dalvin Cook, right? You got him right there. The news of that game is Stafford had to have the second negative test. It looks like he did. He's going to be good to go. I talked about this on the Thursday Tournament Takes podcast with Killa B and Kirk Dees about if we get Stafford, we like Dalvin Cook a little bit more, but I think, everyone likes Dalvin Cook this week. So what are your thoughts with him first of all at the top?
So before I really knew he was going to be that chalky, I planned on having a lot of him. The fact that he's probably going to be the highest owned running back on the slate, yes, he can end up doing something, but yes, he can end up with multiple touchdowns. But realistically, like, you think about this, and he's pretty touchdown dependent. He hasn't gotten a ton of targets so far this season. This Detroit team, it's a divisional game, and the main thing is, like, Henry is sitting right there at slightly below him in terms of price, and he's sitting at 7.9K. He has absolutely, like, pretty much just a worse matchup, but similar workload, similar upside, similar dependencies, because he's not used a ton in the passing game either. I think that Cook, as the day has gone on, I've gone lower and lower. I think it was at 80% Cook, and now I'm down to 30, and I think it's going to continue dropping in my builds. So Cook, like, everything kind of lines up well for him, but he's going to be so chalky that I'm not sure if it's worth playing him. I'd rather go with some of the cheaper running backs. I don't feel the need to pay up at running back. Like, swapping off from Cook to Hopkins is just an easy way to do it, like, fully based on salary. Swapping off of him to Henry, or just going down to a guy like Edmonds, Robinson, or Connor. I know Edmonds and Connor are going to be heavily owned. It's just a nice way to differentiate things a little bit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If you're going in lineup HQ here and you're chucking in, I'm going to max put him at the field, because I'm with you. I kind of want to be at the field or less. Here's the deal. 150 lineups. I don't want my day to be dead when this guy bolts for 80 yards on the first play or something, and then it's over. I don't mind taking a stand, but I think just going at field or below gives me enough room. And I also like the passing part of that game, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But one guy you mentioned was Henry. I like that call. Certainly, a great play there for a little bit less that nobody's going to, but I really like James Robinson. And even as the week's gone on, I've come around on Christian McCaffrey right there at the top. 8.5K going up against Kansas City. I know there's a lot of conversation from the coaches talking about, we've got Davis there too, but I don't see it that way. I think he's going to bounce back. I think he's going to play quite a bit here, to be honest, and I'll play a lot of him as well as the pivot there. Any other time, and another thing we talked about was with McCaffrey, at 8,500, we'd always be in. At 8,500 and low ownership, we'd always be in. We get both. And then on the flip side, we used to play him at 10K when the conversation was, will he get enough touches or will he have enough action in this game? So I think it's well worth the risk. Any thoughts on McCaffrey before we move down the line here?
I like that play. Like, we don't know how much Mike Davis is going to eat into his workload. Like, we're really not sure. The reason we played him so much in the past has been not only his passing game work, which Mike Davis got a decent amount of, that we were worried about it earlier on the season when he wasn't getting a ton of targets. And then we thought that, this offense is just not going to target him a ton. And then gets injured week 2, and Mike Davis comes in, and Mike Davis is getting all the targets in the world. So we kind of overreacted to week 1, assuming that this offense was not going to be passing the ball to him a ton. But he's going up against Kansas City. Yes, it's a pretty big spread here, but there's still a chance that Carolina ends up winning this. There's still a chance that Carolina ends up keeping it close. It's a 10-point spread, meaning 50% of the time they're going to lose by 10-plus points. So there's a 50% chance that this game ends up staying moderately close. And they're probably going to be dumping the ball off to him a decent amount. Good chance that Mike Davis doesn't actually get that involved in the offense. It's probably going to be an 80-20 timeshare. So I like the McCaffrey pivot from Dalvin Cook, because you're getting him at a $1,500 discount, which is roughly equal to his just straight up difference in timeshare than he has had in the past. So I like McCaffrey there. I really like swapping off of him, and I think that he's a great play. And I've got him currently pegged for 20% ownership in my lineups, minimum up to 50.
Yeah, and we'll get to the cheap running backs too, guys. I know a lot of people in the chat are asking. Also, Philip Lindsay just announced officially active. So Tim Patrick's active as well. We'll talk about wide receivers later, but we are going to talk about these cheaper running backs. Before we do that, though, just you mentioned the chalk there a little bit on James Conner and Chase Edmonds. Do you have a preference? Obviously, you can play both, but I think both those guys are in pretty good spots as well. But want to talk about it a little because they are the next highest as far as heavily owned goes. So, what's your thoughts on Edmonds and Conner?
Edmonds is my favorite play on the weekend. I don't care how chalky he's going to be. 25% projected, not high enough for me. Like, this is a perfect offense for him. He's heavily involved in the passing game. His price tag's way too cheap. He's going up against a funnel run defense. This is absolutely perfect. Like, if I'm picking like any of the top 3 owned running backs, it's Edmonds, and it's not remotely close to me. I have him at currently 80% ownership. I might fully lock him in. The problem is just the way that lineup building goes, it doesn't really work too well. But he is a guy that I want in virtually every single lineup. Just the workload, the price tag, the matchup, everything just is perfect for him.
Yeah, I do like him more than Connor personally. We will mention it. I mentioned it at the top a little bit with Cook. I'm going to talk about some Kirk Cousins stacks. I'm in on Big Ben stacks this week. I know you've got some takes. We'll get to that when we move over to quarterback. But I think the thing about Edmonds and why I want so much of him myself is just because he works in all angles. So the matchup is already good for him. Everything that he can do out there, we're excited about that. But you can play Edmonds with Kyler Murray. They go quite well together. That you sort of run up the whole red zone with those two in there. You can pair them with Edmonds and Hopkins if you want to get extremely unique in large fields, stuff like that, where it's just a way to keep a chalk running back, but then differentiate with a really low owned wide receiver in Hopkins. And then, a guy that's 8.2K, but everyone's on the guys below. And then Kyler Murray's not getting as much love as some of the others at the top there. So we will get to that. Let's move down to sort of this mid-range here. I like Josh Jacobs, questionable all week. Should be good to go here. I think this matchup, high total, good matchup, explosive game, back and forth. I like Herbert. I like Carr. I think this game is going to go back and forth, but I definitely think Jacobs will be a part of that. Any thoughts on him and then anybody else below him moving down before we get to David Montgomery and David Johnson, the Davids?
I mean, honestly, I don't really have a strong take. I have my ownership spread out pretty all over the place. For the guys in terms of price, Jacobs is fine. He's in a good spot. It's a high scoring game. He's likely to get a heavy workload. No problem with using him at all, but he doesn't really make the cut for me because I love Edmonds and Connor so much. And the difference in ownership is not nearly enough for me. He's projected at 17% ownership. I think that's about where he should be at. I think his price tag's about where it should be at. It's not really worth it to me to go with him, and I just don't think it's a great idea. So I'm not doing it. I'm paying up a little bit more at running back, but I have a few guys that are in the much cheaper range that I really am starting to like more.
Yeah, let's get to that then. I think that's good. That's what we got you on here for. I want to hear your takes. You know what? You get me in the mindset. I always save about 50 of my 150 to build after this, after the guest gives me all the insights. So, first off, David Montgomery, David Johnson, mentioned them previously, the Davids. They're getting a little love down here. The people in the chat want to know your thoughts on them. And then definitely give me the other takes down below, Grant. What you got?
So Montgomery, I'm just not using. I get he gets a big workload. He's very touchdown dependent. He's going to be fairly heavily owned. It's an easy fade for me just because he needs a touchdown in order to get there. Yes, he's been a little bit more involved in the passing game, but if he doesn't get a touchdown, he's probably not ending up with 20 points, which is what I want. David Johnson is something that people keep going back to over and over again. I'm using him kind of with my Jacksonville stacks because I'm using a decent amount of Jacksonville here today, with their passing game at least. So he hasn't had over 20 carries in any game so far this season. He hasn't had over 20 points in any game so far this season. He hasn't had multiple touchdowns. There's a lot of things that can happen. And we know that Jacksonville last year had the worst run defense in the league. This year, they've been slightly better, but it's more they're better versus or much worse versus the pass. And so I'd rather target the Houston passing game here. David Johnson, I'd rather not use. I'd rather swap over to a guy like Antonio Gibson at drastically lower ownership. I don't have a ton of ownership in him, but he could easily end up with 20 carries in this. Washington has a great defense. The Giants, yes, they kept it close with Tampa Bay last week, but Gibson is just a far better play when you consider all the ownership of Montgomery and David Johnson at virtually the exact same price tag. So, like, honestly, it's pretty close to a coin flip between Montgomery, DJ, and Gibson, who's going to end up with the highest score. And Gibson, in all likelihood, has a higher ceiling. Like, he can get 5 targets in the game, same as DJ, same as Montgomery. So the rushing attempts, he got 20 last week versus Dallas. Yes, that was situational, but we could see something similar here. I'd rather go with Gibson. He's probably going to get close to the same workload, and the matchup is not much worse than the other two. So he's just the easy pivot to me. But cheaper guys like DJ Dallas, people are going to be scared. Like, they don't know how much he's going to end up involved in the offense. They seem to like him last week. Yes, Homer was injured and probably still is a bit injured, but he was involved in the passing game. He got 18 rush attempts. Gets a matchup versus Buffalo now, which isn't fantastic, but it's not terrible. I think that this is just a great spot here for DJ Dallas. We currently have him pegged for 15.4% ownership. I think that that's not going to be that high. Like, with Alex Collins being in the mold and with Homer still being there, I don't think that many people play him. This may be just entirely speculative, but also in my season-long leagues, no one picked him up. No one. He was literally on the waiver wire. So that just goes to show me that, yes, sharp people might be playing him, but a lot of guys that don't really know too much and are worried about things aren't going to be playing him. We have him pegged for 15.4% ownership. I think it's going to be lower. So use him. And then Justin Jackson is just – he's going to be heavily involved in the receiving game. This is going to be a high-scoring game. He's probably going to get 20 total touches in this one against a bad defense. I really like him. And if you want to take a GPP shot, I don't think J.K. Dobbins is the worst idea in the world. Like, this game can go a whole bunch of different ways. The Colts are an interesting team that's tough to figure out. I think that if he goes off for a long run, low ownership, he could end up going off. But where I'm mostly differentiating myself is in wide receivers and tight ends.
Yeah, and we're going to move there soon. I'm with you on the Antonio Gibson take. We did talk about him on the Thursday pod as well, which is also free for everyone. Also, guys, if you haven't signed up, producer Devin just dropped the link in the chat. You guys can go check it out. Get $5 off your first month. The Gibson take, you nailed it, right? It's sort of the same production, if not more, possibly higher ceiling, and he's 1/3 or 1/4 of the ownership of the guys that are actually getting tags around him. So I like that. I'm with you on Dallas and Jackson. I do lean Jackson, and it's partially because of what you said, but that's why the ownership is a little bit lower. I kind of worry with Pete Carroll talking about Alex Collins and then bringing him up that it could be
Carroll
something.
Is a notorious liar.
Yeah, he got paid today, by the way. I think he just signed a 5-year contract extension. So if he wants to keep that rolling, and the money's already there, but I would stick with DJ Dallas. He certainly looks like the much better back to be rolling out there, and I think that it's definitely a possibility. I'll probably have the same as the field, if not a little bit more on Dallas. Got to check my exact exposures, but I definitely like Dallas this week. Like you said, based on everything we saw last week, he looked really good. And I've got a tough time, like you said, just believing that coach speak because of A, it's Pete Carroll, and B, when a guy does something like that the week before, it's almost like you got to just keep going back to him. It was, Fulgham, Claypool, those guys, the couple big weeks they had, they still got big touches the next week as far as opportunity goes because the coaches said, hey, if they're going to do it for me one week, I'm going to try them on again. Let's see if they can do it at this level and keep it rolling. And then my favorite play in there is Justin Jackson. I know the ownership comes with it, but it was pretty clear he's the guy, not Kelly. I expect it to stick that way. I don't like him in lineups that I have Jacobs in. So if you guys want to go to player groups, you can create a new group. You can set it up for Justin Jackson. You can set it up for Josh Jacobs, and you could say use at most one player. And then back here, I could still make sure I'm over on both because I'm just so much all over that game, right? I think this game is going to be awesome. I'm excited about it. I think Carr has an opportunity to do well here. We've seen what Justin Herbert has done so far. I think he's on pace right now, personally, in my opinion, to be the rookie of the year. As much as Burrow's done, Chargers are getting wins with them. In some cases, they're still losing some one-score games like they do, but I just think the long-term, the upside is there with him. Dobbins, you mentioned, you probably don't know this, but I'm a huge Ravens fan. Being in Canada, we get to pick any team we want, and I've always been a Ravens fan, so weird choice, but it's just something for me that I have a tough time getting after. I think the price is definitely too cheap. Love the upside of the long-term of a guy like Dobbins. But when you've got, last week, again, Lamar, another 16 carries, the week before 9, the knee looks to be okay. He's picking back up with those carries. I do worry about that. And also forgot to mention with Tremaine Pope is out as well for Jackson. That was something of news that I was waiting on throughout the week. As much as I didn't care about him anyway, it's just nice to see when it's down to one guy and Kelly hasn't really shown much. So A lot of talking there. Anybody else here below that you like, Grant, or should we move on to quarterback?
I mean, depending on the Zeke news, obviously Pollard. Yeah, I mean that's really it. Like you can kind of. The nice thing is like I'll have a decent amount of Jackson or Jeff. Why can't? Yeah. So like it makes it real easy to swap over from Jackson to Pollard and then just swap one other thing around because I have a lot of late game exposure. So it's nice to have a decent amount of ability to change things around.
Yeah, great call. And to those of you that aren't using late swap, it's probably time to get on it. It's something that is extremely powerful and you should be using, like Grant just mentioned. While it does start at 4:05 Eastern, the Chargers game, you got to make sure you've got Jackson in there. And if you can swap down, there's going to be some swaps to be made in the later games. If Zeke is announced out and you need a spot to leverage up or get after it, you can go to a guy like Pollard there in that game. I'll save it. I know you got to take on this Dallas-Pittsburgh game. I've got thoughts as well, but let's move over to quarterback. We'll talk about the chalk first, and then this is where we're going to start getting into it. You can tie in a lot of that passing game stuff you talked about with wide receivers, tight ends, people that you like as far as you can put within these lineups. So obviously not quite the same as last week with weather. So last week where we had Jimmy G and Russ get all that congested ownership because it was the game with the highest total, no weather, all those factors that went into it, and then kind of disappointed, especially on the Jimmy G side, but overall there was opportunity in the afternoon with Herbert last week. Another guy we'll talk about going here in week 9, but you've got Josh Allen and Russell Wilson are right up there with Deshaun squeezed in between. So what are your thoughts on these guys here as the week's gone on and where you're going with them as far as quarterbacks are concerned?
I mean, sorry, I was looking at something for a second. You said Josh Allen, Watson,
the chalk at the top.
Okay.
Yeah, Russ Wilson, those three up there are all, just about 12% and up. That's sort of where the chalk is at this week.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm probably going to be right about the field with it. Like, I love Josh Allen. I'm a huge Josh Allen guy. This is a perfect spot. The weather's good in Buffalo. Seattle, we know their defense. It'll be a little bit improved with Dunbar coming in, and then Adams, I believe, is coming back. So Josh Allen, Diggs, Beasley, Brown, I like all those guys. Like I like throwing. I have a lot of Josh Allen exposure. I think he's my highest exposure QB of the week. Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson. Like Watson's going up against the worst passing defense in the league. Got guys that you can pair with him perfectly with Cooks and with Fuller. So he's something I'm using. Wilson, I don't have a ton of exposure to, and every time I do have exposure to him, I'm not full on stacking. Like I'm using him with either Lockett or Metcalf. Just kind of doing the same thing I did with the Bucks every single week last year. So that I'm probably not too far above the field with any of those guys.
Yeah, and I'm sort of the same. So I've got my conviction play tagged here with Deshaun Watson. I definitely, Allen and Russ Wilson speak for themselves. We know what they are. We know what that game is. I think it's going to be a good one. I definitely like having both sides. I like what you mentioned with Russ about the single stacks. We talked about this one a little bit, but I think a lot of people are going to shy away from Metcalf because it has been rotating with Metcalf, Lockett back and forth. Lockett has the slot matchup, which we all love. The price tag, $6,800 is great. So I'm with that, but I also think that Metcalf is, a grown man. This is a big man's game. I know Tre'Davious White's there. I know how good he is. He's definitely someone to talk about, but I think Metcalf can just do things that others can't, and I wouldn't shy away from that matchup either. And I think there's enough value out there to even be able to make some Russ, Lockett, Metcalf lineups. If you want to go that way, the target tree is extremely congested there. If you don't like Metcalf, you could try on a David Moore or a Will Dissly or something if you want to get extremely off the board in large field GPPs. But that's the way I'm going there. Definitely like Diggs and Brown. Brown is just still too cheap. I know it didn't happen last week, but I think this could be the week where it bounces back. So I like that. The thing about Watson, I've come down a little bit. I'm still above field at 11%. But the thing about Watson I thought about as the week went on, maybe you can give your thoughts. You mentioned the Jacksonville passing game is with the backup quarterback Luton in there. I'm a little bit more worried, and I like Robinson that they just try and run the ball, keep Watson off the field. And we've definitely seen Watson have some bad games, right? When we think he's going to have a great game, we've seen it where it's always that fourth quarter scramble to get back to make value on the day. And it's 7.1K with Josh Allen right there. The more the week went on, the more it kind of passed the ownership across to Allen for me and brought it down a little bit. So I'm not quite 20%, but I'm around 15% on Watson right now. What are your thoughts on that with, the backup quarterback in Jacksonville with Luton and just the way that game could go?
I mean, I like targeting unknowns in DFS. Like Luton's 1% projected own. You have Robinson there that's going to draw some ownership, but not a ton, and he's going to get everything. I like Robinson, but I like targeting this Jacksonville passing game. I think Luton I have pegged at around 10% in my lineups. He's projected at 1% ownership. I think that's a little bit low, but he's 4.9K. You can pair him up with Cole. You can pair him up with Chark. You can pair him up with anyone. Stevie mentioned on Wednesday on the morning grind with me that Cole has by far the most air yards. We don't know what Luton's really going to be like, but Minshew really wasn't that great of a quarterback. When Foles was in there, he wasn't that great of a quarterback. We don't really know what this offense is going to be like, and Houston's not a good defense. Like, everyone's worried about a new starting quarterback. Houston's ranked 28th in DVOA and 23rd in DVOA versus the pass. They're not a great defense. They're not going to really be able to do much versus any quarterback. So a new quarterback in there, and people underestimate how good these Jacksonville receivers are. Like, Chark, we all know is good, but Cole is a decent wide receiver. Shenault is a good wide receiver.
Yeah.
Conley's not a bad wide receiver. They tend to spread the ball out quite a bit, but we don't know if Luton's just going to lock on to one guy. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Cole. We remember what Blake Bortles was like. He would be terrible in a lot of garbage time stuff. This is a situation where we may have a garbage time quarterback here that they're just going to let do anything. And Cole is a guy that we've seen go for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns multiple times. Bortles throwing to him. This guy's been around for a while. He randomly has big games. This could absolutely be a spot. We don't know what the connection is going to be like with any new quarterback in any offense. So this is a spot where Luton could end up with a big game at almost no ownership, and he's incredibly cheap. So you pair him with Cole and with Shenault, and you now have so much money to pay up for all these running backs that I want to pay up for.
Yeah, and I should know too, Bradley Roby's out. So Chark even is in a good spot. Like I say, you don't know who he's going to lock onto, but I was going to ask for the hot take later. I think you just gave it because that's huge. Jake Luton, like I said, is not going to have any ownership really whatsoever. The Millie Maker, that would be a huge play, pairing him up with his wide receivers that are extremely cheap. And then you can run it back with whoever, Fuller, Cooks. You could use David Johnson, who we talked about earlier, if you think that game goes a little bit different and completely hedge off of Deshaun Watson and that passing game and go the other way. So I think that's certainly one of the hottest takes I've heard on here, and I think that's a good one.
That's not going to be the hottest take you hear on here.
That's the good news. That's for everybody sticking around. That's the good news, right? Let's talk about some more. I like Herbert. It's quite obvious. The ownership, I'm surprised, isn't higher. Maybe it will be when we see Locke click in and the numbers actually show up, but I think there's a lot of ways to use him. It sounds like Keenan Allen will go. We'll have to wait and see, but the early morning news looks like it's going to be a go for him. Still, I believe, questionable in there, but the idea of playing him, there's, other guys, Hunter Henry, Mike Williams. If Keenan couldn't go, Mike Williams would be a play there. Guyton, these are guys that Herbert's locked onto and used in the past. So Herbert's interesting, Grant. And then what about a guy like Drew Lock, another cheap guy, 5.2K just below?
I don't mind Drew Lock mostly because I just like what I'm pairing it with. Like, I really am a big fan of Fant. Fant hasn't had a huge game so far this season, when multiple times last year he had those big games. Lock hasn't been in a ton of games so far. He's been injured, obviously. He's only played 4 real full games, and one was against KC. That's a weird one. He looked great against the Chargers in the fourth quarter, or the halfway through the third quarter, like everyone does against the Chargers. But he's played New England. He played Tennessee, and he didn't look bad. That was kind of a situational one where if you watch that game, Tennessee was kind of coming from behind. It was a slow game. The weather, I don't think, was great. It was cold. So it was a spot where Tennessee, it was more situational. Pittsburgh obviously got injured. Patriots, obviously a tough game. But Locke looked decent at certain times last year. He's playing in a dome, which is drastically different than playing up here in Mile High in a lot of games, because the weather any given day could be horrible and then good the next day. So Drew Lock, I don't mind. I'm probably just above the field with him just because I like Fant and I like Judy, both at cheap price tag. Herbert is a fantastic play. Like Herbert versus the Raiders, he's only coming in at 8% ownership. He's cheaper than Allen, than Wilson, than Watson, and he's going to come in at lower ownership. Herbert's put up over 270 yards, 3 of the last 4 games, been over 300 yards many times this season, can put up a ton of points in any given matchup. And he's had some tough matchups. He played against Tampa Bay, he played against New Orleans, he played against KC. Like, he's had a lot of tough matchups where he ends up putting up points, and now he's going up against the Raiders, who are really not a great defense. Currently 31 in DVOA. They're not good at all. So this is one of the best matchups he's had outside of Jacksonville, which was a bit of a blowout. if I remember correctly. I think they were up big, and he ended up with 38 points. So he's getting essentially the same matchup, although it's going to be more back and forth. So they're going to rely less on the running back in all likelihood because he's a 1-point dog. So he can put up a massive game here. I think I prefer him to Josh Allen, Wilson, Watson when we realize that we can pair him with Keenan Allen, who people might be scared of playing because he has that throat issue, but really that was more COVID precautions. He's going to get 10-plus targets. So you can either pair Herbert with Keenan Allen, or a smart move is assuming that getting some leverage and playing Mike Williams, Hunter Henry, Guyton, who can go off for a 70-yard play at any given time at very low ownership. I have more exposure to the Chargers than I think anyone else here.
Yeah, besides maybe me. No, I mean, in between, I know you're talking about DFS plays, but yeah, I've got a lot of exposure to that game. I'm with you there. Everything you just said. The Drew Lock one is definitely interesting because, like you said, what you compare him with. Judy and Fant, extremely cheap. Julio being the chalk, which we'll get to when we get to wide receiver in a second, makes it so you can go that way and still utilize a high-owned guy on the other side with a little bit lower-owned stack on the opposite side. And then with Tim Patrick being active, I don't mind that play as well. Someone asked in the chat, still recommend Judy. I'm still on Judy because I like everything about this matchup is good. Their D is a little bit banged up for Atlanta, and Tim Patrick can catch a bomb too. He's sort of like the Guyton that you just talked about for Herbert. That's what you could see happen with Tim Patrick, a 40-yard touchdown, boom, and he's already at value, and then he's got the whole game to keep it going, and it helps Drew Lock push up his ceiling as well. So the next range, Grant, and we got to talk about this, is three high-powered guys that nobody's talking about. So you got Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Kyler Murray. Any preference between the three? We don't got to talk about them all, but I mean, I think there's definite reason to go to at least one or two of them here because these guys still have some great matchups. Carolina with Mahomes, Kyler Murray against Miami. I think these are big time spots and no ownership going with them at their price tags of 7.8 for Kyler, 8.1 for Patrick Mahomes, and 6.9 for Lamar Jackson. Any thoughts there?
By far my favorite is Lamar Jackson. Mahomes is always in play, but he's 8.1K. Game script could not be great, but he's Patrick Mahomes. He's always in play. Kyler Murray, Miami's been a good defense this year. I think they've actually allowed the least amount of points in the league at this point right now. So I like Miami in that game. I think Edmonds is going to do a lot of the work, and it's why I like Edmonds. So I'm not playing Kyler Murray. I don't think at all. I might have one or two lineups with him, but likely going to be my lowest owned quarterback on the slate. He's been good so far this season. Yes, he has rushing upside. Yes, he's probably going to still get a decent amount of rushes, but there's a lot of ways that this doesn't end up going his way. I think that it's probably a spot where I don't really want to go with him at all. And Jackson, though, like last year, how many times did he not put up 25 points? Like it was not very often. This year, it's been a little different. One of those games he didn't end up rushing at all because he had that knee injury. He just played Pittsburgh and put up 18 points. That's a tough matchup. But he played Philly, put up 28 points. He still has that 100-yard rushing upside in any given game. Going up against the Colts, Colts are a tough defense, but he could easily end up going off for a massive game here. 6.9K, low ownership. If you said that he was 6.9K and going to be, what, the 8th, 9th, 10th highest owned quarterback on the slate, last year at any given time, everyone would be just locking him in pretty much.
Yeah, the price is insane. You know, we got the squeaky wheel narrative with Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown there. You know, he's at a decent price. Mark Andrews is 4,800. I don't really love that matchup as much, but like you said, play the unknowns, can certainly go that route. And then Des Bryant is
the
in the
matchup's
mix
pretty good for Andrews. Like Tampa or Indy, if I remember, who plays a Tampa 2 defense. He hasn't been great so far this season, but he's still a guy that can end up with a 2-touchdown game fairly often. I mean, he had 10 touchdowns last year. He's had two touchdown games this year. Like Lamar can focus in on him. He can only have 4 catches and 2 of them be touchdowns. We've seen it multiple times before. You're getting a ton of upside with Andrews at 6.8% ownership on a slate where I'm not really a big fan of a lot of these tight ends, as I am with every single slate. We have Waller, who's I think a little bit more expensive than him. Yeah, a bit more expensive than him and going to come in at way higher ownership. TJ Hawkinson is more expensive than him and is going to come in at the same ownership. Does not make sense to me. Like the only reason not to play Andrews is to play Fant, but Fant's coming in at 3 times the ownership. Even Cardi has Andrews pegged for almost the same exact points as Fant at almost the same exact price tag, but you're getting way less ownership on Andrews. He's an easy guy to pair with, and if Lamar Jackson's going off, it probably means he either has a 4-touchdown game, which is more than likely going to mean a 2-touchdown game for Andrews, or he's going for 100 rushing yards. So it's an easy way to correlate that people kind of forget about because Lamar Jackson's been not great for fantasy purchases all season long.
Yeah, and I like pairing Lamar with just one guy. So, take your pick. You can put him with Andrews. You can put him with Brown. You can do both. No problem. I'm just saying with Lamar and his rushing upside, you don't need to pair him up with that way and could still realize the ceiling for both. Like you just mentioned, if Andrews has 2 touchdowns, Lamar runs for 100 and is part of those, plus throws one more to Dez or something, let's say, that would be interesting. But it's a way that you can get different on the field and still have someone with some upside. I like your takes there. Murray, I still like him a little bit just because I think with Edmonds, it's another way to be different where Edmonds is going to be so heavily owned that you could pair him up. And then, like you said, Mahomes, you can always play. I think it just comes down to the price and what you can fit. Now, the interesting thing with Mahomes is that with Watkins already announced out, you do have Demarcus Robinson, Mecole Hardman, guys for pretty cheap price tags that you can make that 8.1 work. And then we certainly like some of the guys we talked about, McCaffrey. We're going to get into wide receiver here in a second. Any other thoughts down here? I guess for me, the other two guys quick would be Cousins and Carr, and then I'll leave Ben for you, and maybe the Pittsburgh-Dallas take can happen. But Kirk Cousins, I just mentioned it, mainly just because of the Cook leverage. I still think it's a good matchup against Detroit. You've got Thielen, Jefferson, guys that can get it done. Irv Smith for cheap, could be flop lag on him. People wanted to play him last week against Green Bay. It didn't work. Now you can bounce back here, so I don't mind that just with a few shares. Doesn't take much to get overweight with him being 2.9%. And then I always like doing this, Grant, not sure about you, but I like taking the opposite side of a game where it's still got a high total and everyone loves the other quarterback. We already spoke about our love for Herbert, but I think Carr could have a decent game here at 2% owned, and you've got guys to pair him up with. Ruggs, Edwards is playing. You've got Waller, of course, who we talked about. There's a lot of ways you can go with Carr and still use a Charger or two on the other side. Jackson, if you want to fade the pass game some, Jackson and Allen, you're the throat doctor, so you should know about that throat if it's going to be all good as far as Allen's concerned. But like I said, I just can't talk enough about that game. But talk to me about Pittsburgh versus Dallas, because the only other guy I was going to mention was Ben. I think a lot of love for Connors, and I think Pittsburgh just rolls over Dallas. But you think otherwise, so tell the people what your thoughts are on that game and what you see happening.
So Gilbert's coming. We haven't projected as the lowest owned quarterback on the slate. That's ridiculous to me. I understand that Dallas has been terrible. I understand that they look terrible with Dalton at the helm. That was more of a result of, or partially a result of Zeke fumbling and then fumbling, 2 turnovers. Everything changes right there. So that's fine. But I get Dallas has been terrible, but they're still running at the fastest pace in the league. Pittsburgh is a good defense, but this is very situational. They're going to be slinging the ball. Gilbert looked good in, what was it, the AF, whatever was like. This guy is a complete unknown with an offense with Cooper, with CeeDee Lamb, with Gallup, like one of the most stacked wide receiving cores in the NFL. And it's easy to pair. Cooper, look at his home road splits. First of all, let me also say that 14-point road dogs outside of the last few years, I think, home dogs have been one of the highest covering spreads of any situation. Like home dogs of 14-plus points. For a while there, they were covering at a 72% rate, and now they're covering, I think, at a 65% rate over the last decade. This is a perfect spot for them to actually keep the game close. It's a trap game. Every single game for Pittsburgh is a big game now, and it's big for the other team. Cooper, home road splits last season, 869 yards, 5 touchdowns at home, 320 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the road. And I think one of those better games was actually in a dome. I can't remember. I think it was Atlanta. This year, way better at home than he is on the road, and not all of that's just because Dak was at the helm. Like Cooper, the one good game he's had with a different quarterback than Dak at the helm was Dalton against the Cardinals. Yes, that was situational, but they're still going to be playing from behind here. Cooper is one of my favorite plays on the board. He's the best contrarian play, probably at wide receiver on the board. He's going to come in at about, 1.6% ownership? I think that's what we currently have him pegged at. He has a good shot at 100 yards going with a new quarterback who may end up locking on to him. It's a tough matchup, but I don't really care about that. He's drastically underpriced at 5.6K compared to him being 7.4K with Dak at the helm. There is a decent amount of drop-off not having Dak, but this is still a spot where Gilbert could end up with 380 yards passing. We've seen it multiple times in the past before with a complete unknown coming in. We saw it with Matt Flynn in the Green Bay offense. We saw it with Mark Bolger. We've seen it with so many different quarterbacks over the last 10 years coming in, having a ridiculous game in their first game because the other team doesn't really know fully how to plan against them. I really think that Dallas keeps this game close. I'm not going to say that they're going to win, but the more I look into it, the more I really like Dallas to cover here, even against a very tough Pittsburgh defense. Granted, Pittsburgh may have a pick six. I'm still playing the Pittsburgh defense a lot because they're going to be chucking the ball. That means interceptions. That means sacks. But I'm probably going to end up 10x the field on Dallas players, especially the receiving game.
That's a good take. Is that your hottest take? Because that's a really good one. I think
so. Lowest owned quarterback on the slate is probably going to be my highest owned quarterback on the slate.
Yeah, I love these takes. This is right up my alley. I'm actually making notes as I go along, just things that's link in my mind to think about it. And that was one of them. When you said that, the price tag on Cooper is ridiculous. As I talked about with a guy like DK earlier, DK Metcalf, I know that that's a totally different situation where I'm saying he can just make it happen against a guy like Tre'Davious White and obviously has Russ Wilson throwing him the ball. But here you're talking about a 2.2K difference and Cooper can just make Gilbert look good. That's the, sort of a little bit different scenario. But like you said, just get him the ball.
Look at
what
I can't remember his name. Hopkins with Schaub, any number of horrible quarterbacks throwing him the ball. They'll just force feed him because he's that talented, and it's in a dome, which is huge for him. Like Cooper could end up with 16 targets just based on how much Gilbert might throw the ball, which could be upwards of 40 times in this game. Because what do they have to lose? Yes, they're playing for the playoffs and playing for the division, but they have to see if this guy can do something. So might as well give it a try in a game where they're projected to lose by a ton.
Yeah. And Pittsburgh on the road, Big Ben, I should say, on the road used to be a thing too, right? If you think about that, that's sort of the first thing that clicked in my mind where he's had some bad games. You mentioned the 14-point dogs at home have the ability to cover or have covered the most in the past. So I think that's a good way to look at it here. And it'll help us transition over. I think we're going to go to wide receiver now. We've talked about some of these stacks already and ways we can pair them up. When it comes to ownership, Grant, we've got the obvious right at the top. Tyler Lockett, who we talked about at 6,800. Keenan Allen still getting that ownership. Everyone's just good with him. He's going to play. They feel that way, so they're there. Diggs, Julio's the big one. I mean, pretty obvious. Julio just seems too cheap at 7.2K. I know Julio Chalk has burned people a bunch in the past, but it doesn't feel that different here. It just feels like a right price at 7.2K that you can still play him. So Julio takes, and then the rest of the chalk. Where's your head at?
I mean, I'm fine with all the chalk. Like they're chalk for a reason. Keenan Allen is by far my favorite. I think I currently have 80% Keenan Allen. 60 to 80 is where I put my lineup HQ ownerships at minimum 60%. Keenan Allen is just, we know that he's guaranteed something. Like Lockett, there's a lot of ways that he can bust. Like we've seen it before. Metcalf can go the entire game. I'm still all right with a rule in there to have one of Lockett or Metcalf in almost every single lineup. Diggs, he's going to get force fed in this matchup. Has at least 6 targets in every single game. And that was just I think that one game where he only ended up with 6. I think that all those came like halfway through the second quarter and on. He didn't have a single target halfway through the second quarter, if I remember correctly. So he's a guy that's probably going to end up with 10 targets. Is a good spot versus a very bad defense. He has the potential to get 30-plus points here. So I'm fine with playing him. Allen already said. Julio Jones, another guy going to get force-fed. When you get outside of those top 4, the chalk isn't really the greatest idea in the world, in my opinion. Like, Metcalf, yes, but Marvin Jones can easily have a horrible game. We've seen it so many times this year. Outside of that 2-touchdown game, he's been the biggest letdown in terms of ownership compared to production. So using him, swap off to Hall, swap off to Hawkins, and swap off to anyone else in that. Amendola, who has pretty much the same ADOT as him and is getting a similar target share as him. I think actually has a higher target share. And is going to come in at so much less ownership because people just remember him from the past, not really being a guy that is that great or is that provides that much upside, and was a big letdown in a lot of different spots. Cooks, it could be a Will Fuller game. Will Fuller, it could be a Cooks game. So fading either one of those guys is fine. McLaurin, I really like a lot. He's just going to get force-fed a little bit, but if you don't want to play him, you can play Sims. He's coming into the offense. He's 3K. He could get force-fed targets. McLaurin has one of the highest target shares in the league, and this isn't necessarily going to be a high-scoring affair. So McLaurin could easily put up a big dud. Like all these chalk guys could easily put up a dud, and you get down to a guy like Hopkins at 8.2K there, only 8.2% ownership. He's a guy that could go off. Jefferson, Thielen, almost always one of them go off, and it's perfect leverage off of Cook. Like the wide receivers from Minnesota are perfect leverage off of Cook because they could get the touchdowns. It could easily end up being them. And let's not forget that Kirk Cousins in any given matchup can look like one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. We saw it versus Atlanta. We've seen it multiple times. He's just there to manage the game. And if Cook's not doing too much, Thielen or Jefferson are probably going to be the ones that are getting the ball. So great way to play out your lineups is have Detroit. Anytime you have 2 Detroit wide receivers, throw in either Jefferson or Thielen instead of Cook.
Yeah, I love that call. We didn't talk about Stafford much, but I think that's a way to go if you wanted. But like you said, I've seen Marvin Jones fail as many times as I've seen him succeed. So it's tougher for me to go there. I'm with you on Marvin Hall, even Amendola. Like you said, the fact that Stafford's in, that makes it a lot better for those guys. Hawkinson as an option, like we mentioned earlier. So I don't mind that. I'm big on Will Fuller this week. It goes with that side. But now I'm looking at the Luton Cole, LaVisca lineups and running it back with Will Fuller. And I think that's another way you could go there. I'd be happy to see that. So I'm going to look at some of those when we get off here. Brandon Cooks on the Houston side is getting a lot of love. I think that's another way. I've heard Cobb mentions even throughout the week, but that's just a product of Deshaun Watson, right? Having ownership, people wanting to play him. Of course, there's so many ways you can stack it. I've heard Jordan Akins, Darren Fells, they're both in, I believe. So if you go that route, you can do that. But I'm with you on Hopkins, 8.2K. Like I mentioned it earlier, no one's really going to play him at that price tag. So it's another way to be different. I also wouldn't mind going with like a Kirk Cousins passing attack, coming back with the Detroit guy, and then using Hopkins over Cook because they're both the same price. And you could use Hopkins in the flex, and it would be where most people would have him in that. You're double leveraging. You're having all the Minnesota guys passing game. Since you're going off that, you're doubling down. You're using the guy in DeAndre Hopkins at the same price tag as Dalvin Cook. So I think that's a couple ways you could go there. Open it up a little bit to the chat here. I guess it's been pretty active as soon as we got to wide receiver. So a couple questions, just rapid fire in the middle here. Grant, Judy or Tim Patrick?
Judy. I'm way higher on Judy, and I know that he's probably going to be a bit chalkier, but I don't care. Like I don't.
Yeah.
Like it could be Tim Patrick, it could be Hamler, it could be any of those guys.
Exactly. And that's where you could set that up as well. I think Judy's the one I would go with by far. And then if you want to have some lineups with Drew Lock, it would probably be one of Tim Patrick or Hamler for me. That's sort of the boom bust guys. That if it happens, it happens. What about Jefferson versus Thielen?
I side slightly with Thielen, but not by much. Like currently, I think we haven't pegged it around the same ownership, so I'd rather go Thielen than Jefferson.
Okay. I like the Jefferson side. I just think he's shown, he's a rookie, right? But he's shown some explosiveness. He's shown what he can do at a little bit more upside. I think for me, Thielen anytime could get 2 touchdowns himself. So that's why I'm playing both of them with Kirk Cousins lineups. But if you had to pick one, what about Hall or Amendola?
Amendola, but I like both of them over Marvin Jones.
Yeah, I do like that call as well. Hall is just sort of the same thing as what we talked about earlier with Patrick or Hamler. It would be like a boom bust thing versus I think, the Amendola thing you mentioned with the ADOT being the same as Jones can definitely see that. And it's not like he can't do something. It's just his ceiling always seems like it's going to be capped. But if he does anything, it means Marvin Jones probably does nothing. And to your point, you like both those guys over him. What else do we got here? Best wide receiver under 4K, or sort of let's just say in the 4K range between John Brown, Judy, and then a couple other guys in there that you can think of. Anybody else in the 4K range that you like?
I mean, Marvin Hall's probably the best one under 4K, either him or if it's exactly 4K, Keelan Cole. But I like Marvin Hall. I like Keelan Cole. I like Preston Williams. We don't know exactly who Tua is going to lock onto, and Preston Williams was fantastic at a certain point last year. Them, Chenault are all probably my favorite guys in that range. If that's what you're looking for, is just right around 4K.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's what I was thinking. I do like the John Brown in your lineups with Allen, obviously, and everyone just thinks that's odd, but you can do a secondary stack or something. It's just not as ideal. If you were going a secondary stack with John Brown, for me, if you just wanted a piece of that game and to say, look, I just want to touch it, I don't want to go all in on a game stack there, you could go John Brown and DJ Dallas. They're both cheap enough. They don't require their quarterback to hit the ceiling. Like you could definitely have a huge John Brown game and it not be, be on one play because he's only 4.6K. Could have an 80-yard touchdown, 3 more catches for 30 yards, and it's good enough at 4.6K, but it might not mean that Allen goes off. It could be a rough game otherwise for Allen, and DJ Dallas does a bunch of the work for the Seattle side. So I don't hate that. Pittsburgh, talking about a comeback there. I talked earlier on the show before we got on. People don't know, man. Chase Claypool, Canadian. He's my guy. Mapletron is the nickname that's going around for Chase Claypool. He's been doing his thing. Happy to see that. But there still is, Juju and DIONTAE there. So you had some good takes there with Pittsburgh. What's your thoughts as far as wide receivers go, bringing it back? Because we know Connor is going to be extremely popular. So what's your thoughts on the passing side of that game?
I mean, Juju is probably my least favorite. I think it's going to be either Johnson, just because he's going to get a massive workload. Anytime that he's on the field, we don't know how much he'll be on the field. Him or Claypool are probably going to go off for a big game, but it's entirely dependent on if Johnson ends up getting injured. And last week was a little bit of a different week just because they were going up against Baltimore and their defense and game script and everything. But I'm fine with either of them. I don't really want to play any Juju.
Yeah. Claypool at 2.1%. This guy, if you've seen him out on the field, he's a beast. He looks like the size of DK. He's just big. He's so huge out there when you see him. And then, like you said, DIONTAE Johnson can be tilting at times because it feels like he's always injured. But I don't know. That only feels like when he's chalked that happens, because then when everyone's cheering for him, when he's just sort of on the TV in the background and nobody's watching, it seems like that's when he goes off and has his biggest games. I know they're not correlated whatsoever. I always say that with ownership.
It's literally situational. Game. Like
it's
he came back for one game, and then the first two games, no one really expected a ton out of him, and that's when he was going off. So everyone switched over to him from Juju, who they expected to be the number one guy, and it's clearly probably Johnson right now.
Yeah, we'll keep going here, and we'll move to tight end and then get some final. Keep throwing the questions in, guys. We're going to rapid fire some more at the end. Real quick, the Gilbert take is a strong one. I do love it here. I think, the price tag on Cooper, we already talked about. Some people right away in the chat were all over that take. Gilbert's actually a good quarterback. For those of you that don't know, he can throw it downfield with some of the conversation in the chat. Anybody else you like if you had to pick between Gallup, Lamb, and then let's say we're going to, segue to tight end anyway, Dalton Schultz, any other guys you like there with them besides Cooper, and would you double stack them?
Yeah, I have no problem double stacking them. I need to double check on their price tag again, but Cooper, it's all based on pricing. And if you're going to double stack them, that means that they're probably going to be either fully trash time down by so far that they're just allowing them to do stuff, or it means that the game's close. So if you're going to double stack them, I think I prefer Gallup to Lamb. Gallup's sitting there at just 4K. We know his potential upside. We know how good he is. He was looking fantastic at certain points last season. He's cheaper than Lamb. Yes, Lamb is very talented, but we are not really certain how much work he's actually going to get with Gilbert. The same thing with Gallup. So I'd rather go with the cheaper guy who's proven in the past to have 20-plus point upside, 30-plus point upside games.
Yeah, I agree. The thought process there for me would be, like you said, Lamb is going to be excellent. He already has been fine. It's nothing wrong with him. We're just saying he's more of a slot guy. And Gallup, if we're talking about the downfield conversation and what we're going to see air it out here, if he's going to hit 380 yards or something like that, I think Gallup and Cooper will be the guys to make it happen. So I like that. Run it back with Connor, Claypool, DIONTAE. Those are sort of the guys we mentioned on the Pittsburgh side. So big on that. If that takes down a Millie Maker, this show is going to get clipped out, and Grant's the man. We're going to roll with that. So a couple other guys down below. Darnell Mooney is interesting at 3.9K. I think with Golden Tate out a little bit higher at 4.8K is Shepard. Sterling Shepard. Someone asked, can you play a Giants wide receiver as a one-off? I think it'd be fine. He gets a lot of targets. That game could go back and forth. Already talked about that. And then there's cheap ways to go. You could have Shepard across from Gibson for a cheaper secondary stack. You could have Shepard across from Logan Thomas. And with that, I'm going to segue into the tight end. So not really super high on Thomas myself. I just wanted to mention that secondary stack because I think that's a way you could go. But what are you doing here with the tight ends, Grant? Because we've got pretty, spaced out ownership as far as the tight end position goes. You mentioned Fant earlier, but then there's Hayden Hurst, Darren Waller, Hunter Henry, Kelsey, all right in the mix. So talk to me about tight end for a little bit here.
I mean, a lot of it is just when I'm doing a double stack and then throwing a tight end in. The two main guys that I really like are Andrews and Fant. I'm a fan of Waller. I'm worried about his ownership a little bit, but I'm not really going to take that too much into account. I think Hunter Henry is a fantastic play this week. Like, Hunter Henry really hasn't done a ton. People are very low on him. We have 10% ownership, and I know that I mentioned this earlier with leagues like fantasy season-long leagues being low on stuff. People are dropping Hunter Henry in every one of my fantasy leagues because he hasn't gotten there yet. But you look at his target counts, he's had 2 weeks under 7 targets. Like, the volume is there, the price tag is too low, the matchup is there when he's had a few tough matchups already. Like, he just hasn't gotten touchdowns. He's got 1 touchdown on the year. He hasn't gotten a ton of yards, but that's just kind of more circumstantial. He can get 8 catches for like 80 yards and 2 touchdowns in any given game. He's a guy that I think is way overlooked right now, and a guy that could easily end up putting a legit 20-point game up. Burton, I think, is a decent call here. He's only projected 4% ownership. Yes, it's against Baltimore, but I think that he could be in for a decent game because T.Y. Hilton not being in, yes, he hasn't done anything all season long, but Philip Rivers is down to even less potential targets in his offense, and they're going to do a whole bunch of weird things like they always do. And Philip Rivers can basically just throw the ball to anyone. We've seen it before in the past when Keenan Allen was injured and Antonio Gates wasn't playing. We saw him just throw to any number of random people, including his running backs, which he still likes to dump the ball off to a lot, which killed me last week. But yeah, like those are it's Andrews and Fant are by far my 2 favorite tight ends on the slate.
Yeah, Henry's my favorite, so I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's another way to go. I think if you're going, just notes here, Herbert, Allen, Henry is definitely affordable. And then we talked about guys you can use on the other side. Judy's a great one. If you wanted to get a little bit aggressive with a Patrick or a Hamler, I like Patrick more, but I'm just saying now that he's in, no one's going to be on him because he was just announced late. So I do like that stack, and I still think it'll be more than unique enough, even though everyone thinks, but everyone's on Herbert. He wasn't. We just showed him. He was like the 5th highest owned, 4th highest owned. It wasn't the highest owned like the other guys. Allen, with the questionable tag, still has ownership going with him, but it looks like about 8 out of every 10 lineups won't have him, showing around 19%. And then Henry here is the 4th highest at just 10% owned. Run it back with a Judy or a Patrick, and you've got quite the unique stack still for a 3-1 in something like the Millie Makers. So I don't hate that. Guys, keep throwing your questions in there. Now's when we're going to start going through those. We don't normally talk defense, Grant, but you've got some good takes today and some hot ones. Any thoughts on this? I like to just spread it out. We've talked about it in the past. That's why we don't normally go through it, because you're just playing. It's a high variance position. You're throwing in whoever you can. But any connections, maybe running back, DST stacks, or just defenses that you like in general for certain reasons?
I mean, with everyone wanting to pay up at running back and Pittsburgh being by far the most expensive defense, like I said, Gilbert, I will probably have a stack with Gilbert and the Pittsburgh defense at Connor in it. Like, it's just when you're playing the fastest pace offense in the league in Dallas, like if Gilbert puts up 21 points on the board and none of them come from defense or the running back, like if he throws 3 touchdowns and they end up with 21 points, Steelers can easily end up with 5 sacks, 6 sacks, and a TD. Like, it's not within the realm, or not within the realm of possibilities. Like, a guy that's a gunslinger that's going to be throwing the ball, that's coming from behind, is going to get a lot of value for the opposing defense. So just paying up that extra 1.3K and then spending down elsewhere, especially if you have Gilbert in there and Cooper and Gallup, you're not spending a ton of money on that. And Connor is not the most expensive running back. I don't mind playing the Steelers defense, and I don't mind pairing him even with Gilbert. It's a weird idea, but it's worked multiple times before in the past, especially in Dallas. Like, I had one when they played the Giants, I stacked up Dallas with the Giants defense, and it worked out decently. So that's a spot where I think it's a good thing to do. Titans probably one of my favorite defenses. I think they're going to be one of the better defenses. I know the Blitz likes them going up against Chicago, Nick Foles. Interceptions can happen, sacks can happen. So they're probably my favorite that's decently priced. Outside of them, like, you can use the Vikings up against Stafford if you want to go cheap. You can use the Giants up against Washington. I think that's going to be one of the chalkier defenses, but I could be wrong there. Those are probably the defenses I'd end up going with.
Yeah, I like those. The ones at the top are a little bit tricky because, 15% on any defense is always tough. I do like Arizona. I think it's because Edmonds, you can go that route. Now, obviously, Tua still being new, we haven't seen a lot yet. I think he's going to be great, but we haven't seen a lot of it yet, right? One start only last week. So going back to... By
the way, sorry, Matt Smith is in chat talking about how Gilbert sucks. There's a reason why he didn't get a shot. Well, just look at what happened with Kurt Warner. Also, I believe he was an undrafted or a 6th-round pick, played over in the Arena Football League, showed some stuff, and he came in there and just absolutely crushed.
Yeah, this is that's an interesting take. We'll have to see. I think it's a great play. Like you said, the matchup. I don't think anyone's talked about it all week, so I really hope it stuffs back and we hit this one because, like you said, with Cooper's price, Gilbert, the ability to throw, and as far as your take on the defense goes, there you see it in showdown all the time, and obviously people shy away with it. You get into these lineup builders like our own, and it's there for a reason. Max defense 0. That's fine. That's typically what I want on a large slate 0. But the reason it can work in a spot like this, to your point, is that it could be right off the hop where this guy's taken, a pick 6 against him. And then guess what that means? He's now behind. He has to start throwing and the game's just begun. So it can definitely happen where we've seen that in the past. And it's, defenses, when that, the Mexico shootout between the Rams and the Chiefs, that game went off. Everybody stacked fantasy points there and both defenses crushed in that game. So you can see it happen. It's just not something people think of commonly. So, other questions, someone asked, we talked a little bit about on this, Grant. I know we sort of overlooked it. It just said the obvious. It's Mahomes. But to ask, did you talk about the Chiefs stacks yet? Very attainable. We mentioned it, right? Robinson, Mecole Hardman. Anybody else you like within that stack or ways you like to go about it if you were going to go with some Mahomes lineups?
I mean, Robinson, Hardman, Kelsey, Hill, it's the Chiefs. I never have a strong take on anyone there.
Yeah. I think that's the obvious, like you said, the way to go.
They are really hammering me for Gilbert in chat. And I know I'm not saying he is Kurt Warner, but I'm saying this is a thing that happens very often. Look what happened when Case Keenum came in on the Texans and put up a massive game because he just wanted to throw the ball because they really had nothing to lose, and he was trying to play for a spot. Gilbert literally joined a different league when he had a practice squad offer for the NFL because he wanted to show what he had. Yes, any quarterback obviously believes that he's going to be good because that's what he pretty much takes to be an NFL quarterback. But he has one of the best offenses around him, and he's coming in at 0.6% ownership, and he's incredibly cheap. It's situational on a fast-paced offense. He doesn't have to be good. He just has to have volume and be all right. If he's all right, he's a great play. If he's bad, he's still an all right play. If he's good, then he's the best play on the slate.
Yeah, I think that's the thing people might be forgetting here. We're talking about one day. This is daily fantasy sports. We're not talking about his upside in the future and long term. All I care about is what he does for me today. Can he win me $1 million? Is there a possibility there? Absolutely, yes. And someone said, well, Kurt Warner was in a good offense. Let me explain. Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, some of these guys, whether or not Zeke plays, guess what? Tony Pollard's pretty good too. And the reason why most said the Cowboys, and they probably shouldn't have ever paid Zeke. So I think he's in a pretty good offense himself here in a good spot at home. So I think it's definitely a good take for this slate, Grant. And I don't think it really is something to worry about here. I think these guys are, I just love it when we get the old Twitter machine fired up later, when this guy starts throwing. Let's see, good or bad though, we'll own it. I think it's a strong take.
I'm throwing him in the Wildcat right now just because if he does bad, I lose money now, guys. You happy?
Yeah. This is good. I like it, man. Anything else you want to add before we get out of here? We've answered a lot of these questions here. Final thoughts on the slate?
Again, if you're going to use Gilbert or Luton, do it in big field tournaments with a high payout at the top. Don't use it in something like this. You can use it in the slant, but use it in something with a very high payout because they're going to come in at such low ownership, and the upside based on point per dollar is incredibly high. But if you lock in Edmonds, lock in Keenan Allen, and figure it out from there.
Right on, man. Thanks so much for coming on with me, man. I appreciate it. Everybody in the chat, thank you guys for the support every week. We're here. Follow me on Twitter at @ToeTagAndTambo. Hit me up if you have any questions there. Other than that, thank you and good luck.
Hey, kids.
Here back in the Fantasy Bar, 6 of my favorite plays for week 9 on FanDuel and DraftKings, including a few of my favorite mid-range and value plays. What game am I going to be stacking up, and what running back am I going to have in a majority of my lineups? Belly up to the Fantasy Bar and find out. Welcome in, guys. Beers Daily Fantasy 6-pack week 9. Good to be back here once again in the friendly confines of the Fantasy Bar, talking FanDuel and talking DraftKings with 6 guys fresh off the tap for you, as always. Now, before we get into week 9, guys, do me a favor on YouTube. Guys, click that thumbs up button. That's the tip jar here in the Fantasy Bar. Helps us out a lot over at Rotogrinders, and I greatly appreciate it. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and get notified when these videos are coming out. Now, let's take a quick look back, as always, like we do here in the Fantasy Bar at Week 8. And obviously, Dalvin Cook, the headliner here, not going to victory lap guy, not going to take a victory lap on that one. Why? Because the rest of the six-pack, honestly, very ho-hum. We didn't get the revenge we thought we'd get out of Le'Veon Bell. My flashback to try to make AJ Green work didn't work either. And the rest of the six-pack, pretty ho-hum. So hopefully Dalvin Cook matched up with your research. You had some exposure there, but I am ready to turn the page here to Week 9. That's exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to go right back to the running back position, not with Dalvin Cook, although I do like him a lot this week. We're going to go to the mid-range with Antonio Gibson of the Washington football team against the Giants. Almost slipped the Redskins in there on you, but the football team here for Washington. But I love this spot here for Antonio Gibson. Coming off a bye, we saw him have his most productive game as a pro in that game before the bye against that woeful Cowboys defense. And I know that was a big part of it, but 20 carries in that game. And I know he's been splitting pretty much 50-50 on the snaps with J.D. McKissic, but did outcarry him 20-5 in that game. Would like to see more usage in the passing game here out of a guy who played some wide receiver in college. And I know McKissic kind of steals some of that away. But the point is, if he's going to get 20 carries here in a home matchup against the Giants, I'm very interested under 6K on DraftKings, just a tad over 6K on FanDuel. This guy's been a touchdown maker. 4 games of the past 6, he has found the end zone here. So the Giants done pretty well against the run here. And I'm seeing very minimal ownership here. We get a guy at home as a favorite. We don't get to say that very often here with Washington, but a guy think we know the upside is there. The ownership will be very minimal. Antonio Gibson going to lead us off here in Week 9. All right, let's stay in the cheap seats at wide receiver. We're going to go to Pittsburgh. We're going to roll with Deontay Johnson against the Cowboys. So I think what's going to happen here each and every week with these Steelers pass catchers, you never know who it's going to be. You know, you got Chase Claypool having big weeks. We have Juju Smith-Schuster coming into the year, was the alpha. We have Deontay Johnson, who we've seen, when healthy, be the most productive of these three. So we definitely know we want some exposure here. I'm expecting James Conner to be heavily owned at the running back position so we can find some leverage here against this awful Cowboys D, like we mentioned. And I think this is a spot to do it with. And sometimes it's as simple as me as who's the cheapest of the three, and I think who will be the lowest owned of the three. And I think Deontay Johnson checks both of those boxes, and he's the lowest price on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So you're getting great value here. And a guy we've seen, like I said, when he's in the lineup, he's been the most productive of these receivers. Really only one bad game when he's played through a whole game. Other than that, it's generally 10 to 12 targets a game. And this Dallas team has had no issues allowing production to this position. 6 most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So again, James Conner probably going to be very chalky here. This Pittsburgh passing game will definitely have some ownership because of this matchup. But Deontay Johnson, the guy I think will fall through the cracks, the cheapest of the three, and potentially the lowest owned, the guy I'm targeting the most here against the Dallas Cowboys. All right, let's go to the quarterback position. A lot of great options this week. We're going to go with Justin Herbert of the Chargers. Now, this guy for a rookie, been very, very impressive. Him and Joe Burrow just continue to smash each and every week. In fact, Herbert, 3 or more touchdowns now in each of the last 4 games, 14 total touchdowns. Now we got to throw last week away, that windy game. I'm not looking at Baker Mayfield stats here, but I am looking on the season overall, and the Raiders, 8th most fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. That includes those numbers from Mayfield. So it wasn't so windy. This number could be even worse for the Raiders. And we also know Justin Herbert gives you some sneaky rushing upside as well. So you raise the floor. The ceiling has been there. Vegas, 3rd most rushing touchdowns allowed to the quarterback position. So just a little bonus there on Justin Herbert, but the numbers have been phenomenal here. This game, a massive total over 50, a game I want a ton of exposure to, and the main piece I want is Justin Herbert of the Chargers. All right, who do we pair him up with? A lot of options here. We're going to go wide receiver Mike Williams as that pairing here against the Raiders. Now, I love Keenan Allen here as well, no doubt, and I don't even mind the double stack here. I think there's enough production and enough volume for both of these guys to go around, but Keenan Allen checking in as one of the highest owned receivers on the week here. So let's either do the double stack, which a lot of people don't like doing, or better yet, let's just go with Mike Williams here on his own. We know that Raiders defense has struggled against the pass. We talked about it with Justin Herbert, but 27 in DVOA this season against the pass are the Raiders, and we've seen huge spike games out of Mike Williams, including big 30-point game against the Saints, 20 in that game last week. So he's a guy we know can go big on the salary, a 5, a 6, a 7x return here in a potential shootout. Love the pairing of Justin Herbert and big Mike Williams here against Las Vegas. All right, who do we run it back with? I like that game so much, we're going to stay there for one more play. We're going to go to tight end and run it back with Darren Waller of the Raiders. So he's the guy I want on the other side. I think some Josh Jacobs is probably in play here as well. Some people may try to target Henry Ruggs. Okay with that, but Waller, really the guy that stands out and the guy I want to go back to. Again, we kind of tossed last week out, not taking much out of that game with 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds. This is a guy getting a ton of targets in this offense. And even in that win game, saw 6 targets, but averaging almost 9 targets a game. He is the alpha here in this offense. And against this Chargers defense, this is a position I want to attack. The Chargers have really had troubles with the tight end position. Bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed so far this season. Price is fair. Yes, normally we want a cheap tight end, and there are certainly some options out there. But if we're stacking this game, Waller, the guy I want to run it back with. Again, prices are fair. Matchup is there. Darren Waller, my favorite tight end here in week 9. All right, it's time to take a look at my favorite play for week 9. But before we do that, guys, as always, the Beast of the Week contest rolls on, absolutely free to play. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button. All you have to do, get in the comment section of the video and gets fantasy points on DraftKings for my Beast of the Week. The closest guess will win themselves either a free week of Rotogrinders Premium, and that's going to give you access to everything, and not only football, it's going to give you some golf as well. We got some big tournaments coming up, so get a chance to peek behind the curtain there if you're not a member, or if you already are a loyal subscriber, and we thank you for that, we'll send you a free Rotogrinders t-shirt. So without further ado, let's take a look. My favorite play for week 9. You know, Max, Beast of the Week. All right, Beast time. We owe you one more running back. Again, Dalvin Cook, kind of an easy automatic play. Love him in this spot against the Lions. We're going to go to Arizona. We're going to go with Chase Edmonds, this week's Beast of the Week. I absolutely love this spot for Chase Edmonds. Been a truther of his for many, many years. Big fan in Dynasty. Pretty much own him in every Dynasty league I'm in, but we're not going to let that bleed into the analysis here of Chase Edmonds. All we have to do is look at the matchup. Miami, dead last, 32nd in DVOA this season against the run. You get a guy that's at home as a favorite here, a guy that's getting a lot of targets in this offense. I mean, we're talking 6 or more targets for him in 3 of the last 4 games. And those targets came with Kenyon Drake in the lineup. So we take him away, and I'm not expecting Edmonds to get 100% of the work here. I do think Eno Benjamin will mix in a little bit, but we're going to get a guy that's going to get a massive uptick in his workload, a guy that's given us 20 fantasy points on DraftKings twice in the last 3 weeks, and he only got 8 carries combined in those 2 games. Think about that for a minute. Let's give him 15 carries here in this game. Let's give him those 6+ targets, and I see 30-point upside here for Chase Edmonds, making him easily my favorite play for week 9 and this week's Beast of the Week. All right, guys, that wraps up for week 9 in the Fantasy Bar. If you have any comments, questions, feedback, hit me up in that comment section. Don't forget, fantasy points on DraftKings for Chase Edmonds for your shot at some free RG Premium or a free Rotogrinders t-shirt. Guys can also head over to Twitter and follow me at BeerMakersFan. For Rotogrinders.com, I am Beer saying salut. Best of luck this week.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to Crunch Time. It is NFL edition, and we are joined by a couple very smart, very sharp DFS minds. One, Miss Christy Metzger. Hey, Christy.
How's it going, Kevin?
Pretty good. I saw your brother crushed in DFS last week, which is awesome. It's a family thing.
I know, it was kind of fun. Saw it on Twitter, saw his name, and told Tyson about it, and he literally had no idea, so he was pretty excited.
All right, we're sure this isn't collusion. This isn't like actually your second team. No, it was him.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, just making sure. We got Tuttle as well. What's up, man? How are you?
Doing all right. Pretty fun slate today. I think it's some decent decisions, at least for tournaments.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to get some of your tournament takes. I didn't enter a squad, but we've got 30 minutes and I've got two sharp people telling me what to do. So I'm thinking I might get one in here before we get going. Before we jump into all the content, I do believe we are running an incredible promo for Monkey Knife Fight, which is you get 3 months of RG Premium if you sign up, plus a $50 deposit bonus, I believe, on Monkey Knife Fight. So it's like a double promo. And we're going to give you a bet that you can't lose with. No pressure, Tuttle. What do you got?
I got two.
Ooh.
Kirk Cousins under the passing yards. You guys have the graphic. I forget what the exact amount was or the exact total. Sent it to Devin a little bit earlier. I believe, let me bring it up here. It was Kirk Cousins under 265.5 passing yards. I'm pretty heavy on Dalvin this week. I really think they're going to control the clock if possible, run the ball as much as possible.
That
Cousins is
good.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook's pretty decent. Cousins has only topped that yardage total once this season, I believe. So it's a good matchup, but I don't see him doing it again. They're going to run the ball if possible. So I got Cousins under, and then the other one I have is Sterling Shepard. We actually kind of vaguely mentioned him before we started pregame. There we go.
Yep.
I have him over 51.5 yards. I kind of think Golden Tate out is going to do a little bit more than people realize to some of these Giants pass catchers. So I do like Sterling Shepard as kind of a sneaky play in DFS, and then at 51.5 receiving yards, I think I'm taking the over there on Monkey Knife Fight.
Okay, I might jump on that in the Sharpside app as well, which, by the way, if you don't have Sharpside, it's kind of like you track your sports betting app. And if you get 7 in a row, if you get your streak to, I believe, 7 in a row, you start getting free FanDuel money. So my streak's at 3.
There you go.
I'm pretty good about that. Just got to kind of double that +1. With that all out of the way, let's dive into this slate. And I'd like to start with Christy. Let's talk about some quarterbacks. Oh, Christy, you have props too? Wait.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's fine. You know what? I'm high on the Houston Jags game. So I've taken the over on Watson. I believe that, just pulling it up here, I think he had 285 yards. So I've got the over there for him. So really like that game a lot. And be talking about that as we get going here.
Okay, excellent. Well, maybe we'll end up starting there. I don't know, but let's go ahead and talk about quarterback and your favorite DFS plays.
Yeah, so for quarterbacks this week, there's a few players that I really like. And looking at the cash plays, I think Russell Wilson is at the top again. I mean, he's just been getting it done week in, week out. I think on the other side of it, Josh Allen, I think is going to carry some decent amount of ownership today too. And then Deshaun Watson, I mentioned I'm really high on that game today. Since Bill O'Brien's been fired, I mean, he's just really been putting up the numbers. He's got great receivers in Fuller and Cooks. And so really, really like him as a quarterback today. I think you can also go to Justin Herbert or Drew Lock as well on the cash game side. And then on tournaments, I think you can take a look at, Kyler Murray. I think Mahomes will be under-owned, and, he's always a top play week in, week out. Derek Carr would be another one maybe that could be on the tournament side. But the first ones I mentioned are kind of the ones I'm looking at cash, really high on Wilson and Allen and Watson, probably for my top 3.
Okay. I will add that Matt Smith in chat would like to say that Christy is the best RG tout for reels.
Aw, man.
Aw, making her blush early in the show. All right. So yeah, you have to have some really good plays after that, Christy. Don't let anybody down.
Well, I can't.
Tuttle, what are you thinking as far as quarterbacks? I'm especially interested in tournament plays here, maybe some kind of stacks.
Yeah, so just to reiterate what Christy said in terms of cash games, and I think it's important to point out, like lineup construction wise, I think you're on both sides in terms of optimal lineups or cash game lineups. You're kind of stuck, I think, in the Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen range. It's kind of where building forces you into. I give the slight edge to Josh Allen there, but I do think those are kind of the two like premier cash game options. There are other builds if you go really, really low at quarterback, but I don't think that's the kind of the optimal approach. In tournaments, I think there's multiple ways you can go. One guy that I have decent exposure to, underwhelmed big time this season, not a good matchup, but Lamar Jackson's going to be low owned. Always has the rushing ability. He did look a little bit more spry after the bye week too. There were some knee concerns pre-bye. in terms of running ability. He actually had a good rushing game before the bye week, but then last week ran the ball a lot more frequently. Some of that was because the Steelers' defensive line was able to get after him a little bit, which forced him to move out of the pocket more. But I do like Lamar as kind of a tournament option. And the thing with him is you can run him by himself if you want, just hoping for that rushing upside. Otherwise, you can pair him with Marquise Brown, who is really cheap on FanDuel specifically. Brown's a little bit tougher to get talked into on DraftKings, but I still think he's a fine stack option with Lamar. And Mark Andrews is another strong stack candidate. I will say again, in terms of Mark Andrews, not really a good matchup. I don't think the Colts have allowed a touchdown to the tight end position yet this season. And that's kind of what Mark Andrews does. We like him because he does score touchdowns. So it's not the greatest matchup, but he should be lower ownership as well. So I think if you're stacking Lamar Jackson, it's with either Marquise Brown or Mark Andrews.
Okay, I should mention weather-wise here that we do have wind. I know we're talking about Watson. That's in Jacksonville, correct?
Yes.
So we should see 15 to 20 mile per hour winds in that game, which is enough to kind of make me be like, it's not great, but it's not enough to push you off the play. It needs to be over 20 miles per hour sustained for me to say, don't do it. Could you see a deep ball that gets hung up in the air a little bit? Sure, that's possible. And if you miss a deep ball, that can be the difference between a win and a loss. But it's not going to impact the vast majority of throws. So don't be too scared of that. Also pretty windy in Kansas City. Again, same deal, 15 to 20 miles per hour. Not enough to do anything about it. Just windy enough to maybe impact a play or two, certainly a kick or two. Let's get to running backs. I think there's a lot of chalky, like cheap guys, but I don't know. Tuttle, am I lying?
Not cheap.
Is it just cheap for playing Patrick Laird. Am I?
cheap on FanDuel, not really cheap on DraftKings in terms of Chase Edmonds, who's going to be, we have him projected as the second highest owned running back on the slate. I think that's accurate. I think he's an extremely good play. I think he'll be the chalky option. Then Dalvin Cook will be the other chalky option. And again, he's not cheap. He's an expensive option, but I do think he's somebody that you want in your lineups on both sites and cash games. So I think you're building from there. I think you're building with Dalvin Cook and Chase Edmonds in your lineups, and then you're kind of filling in that third RB spot from there, whether it be James Conner is pretty inexpensive on DraftKings as well at 6,900. I think he's a strong play. But in terms of optimal builds on DraftKings, I do not think you can fit Dalvin Cook, Chase Edmonds, and James Conner. So you kind of have to decide. If you're leaving that third running back out, then on DraftKings, I think you're dropping down to one of like 4,900 running backs, which is like a Justin Jackson. J.K. Dobbins, I think, is getting a little bit overlooked. I think he's a fringe cash play, but I do prefer Justin Jackson over him. And then DJ Dallas is that other running back in that kind of same price range. Again, I prefer Justin Jackson over all those guys. I think his role is a little bit more solidified in terms of what we can expect from him, and it's a good matchup as well. But I think Justin Jackson's my top value option. The other guy worth discussing real quick, Tony Pollard. We have news that it seems like Zeke's going to try to play at the very least. I think he's a big time favorite to suit up for the game. I would be surprised if he takes on a full workload. What his workload is actually going to look like, we have no idea of, which makes Tony Pollard much better tournament option than cash game option. People are going to be scared off of that matchup against the Steelers. It's obviously not a good matchup. But Pollard has shown us in the past he can catch passes, which is really, really good for DraftKings. You get that PPR. So, I mean, even if you get a Pollard game where he only gets, 50, 60 total yards and 5 catches, then you're not doing too bad for that 4K price. So I think Pollard is still in play in tournaments, but you're probably going to not feel all that comfortable with it because I'm almost certain Zeke will be active for the game.
Okay. Christy, any other takes there, especially maybe tournament thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I do have some tournament thoughts. I agree with all the cash game plays there. A couple guys, I think Josh Jacobs, and I know he was questionable for a little bit, but I think that he makes a really good tournament play. And a couple cheaper guys, especially on FanDuel. Like I said, if you're trying to get Dalvin Cook and Chase Edmonds in there, and you're looking at DJ Dallas potentially, but then David Montgomery and David Johnson are both fairly cheap plays too. And, they've been getting, they've been doing all right. I mean, their numbers aren't great, but they kind of fill that spot there, maybe in the flex spot. So there's some guys I'm looking at. And then another guy I'll mention too is Derrick Henry. You know, we saw it last week. Delvin Cook got hardly any ownership, and it's going to lessen Henry's ownership this week because, you know, your lineup construction is going to lead you to the Delvin Cook and Edmonds and some of the higher price guys for receivers. So I do like Henry a bit. I liked Christian McCaffrey a little bit more. It sounds like they might do a little bit of a split with he and Mike Davis this week, but I like going up to those higher price guys and getting those in, even with a Delvin Cook, because I think there are some values on the receiver side that you can go to. And I kind of like being a little bit unique and getting two of those guys in my build this week.
Okay, we've had a couple people ask about McCaffrey, but I mean, no interest in paying up for a guy who is not going to get all the snaps, or do we have some tournament interest?
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what you say, Tuttle, too. I mean, I had more interest in until I kind of read this morning a little bit that they might do some splits. Don't know if that will happen or not between he and Davis. You know, to me, I'm probably targeting more Henry because of that. Scared me off a little bit. But I mean, I think you can make a case for it. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that, you know, it wasn't true and McCaffrey gets all the carries and, you know, it's just business as usual.
Yeah, that's the exact same take for me too. I'm having trouble justifying him at 8,500, but at the same time, like if there's uncertainty there, which there is, there's plenty of uncertainty in terms of how, you know, what his workload's actually going to be. That really does make him a decent tournament option. You know, he could end up 80-20 split. If that's the split we're looking at, he's probably a pretty good play at 8,500. So yeah, I mean, I have no problem using him in tournaments, but he's not somebody, I actually don't have him. I'm just running one main GPP lineup on both sides. I don't have him in either lineup, but he's somebody I would say you probably can grab exposure to once you start building more lineups.
Okay. Let's go to wide receiver. Christy, what are your cash options here?
Yeah, so for cash options, you know, I think Tyler Lockett is right at the top again. You know, his price is good, and I think his matchup is much better this week than DK Metcalf. So I think he makes a great cash game play. Stephon Diggs, in the other side of it, I think he makes a great play too. He's got a fantastic matchup. And then Julio Jones, and I know we got a lot of high price guys here, but Julio Jones with Ridley being out is definitely someone that, you know, you want to take a look at exposure for. I think Keenan Allen more so probably on DK, but I think he makes a good cash game play. Also think Brandon Cooks and Marvin Jones. I would say Marvin Jones probably a little bit more on DK, but Brandon Cooks as well. I could also see putting, you know, Jerry Jeudy in a cash game lineup too. I know he's 4,700 on DraftKings, 5,700 I believe on FanDuel. I think he's a fine play. We talked a little bit about Sterling Shepard. He's $5,500 on FanDuel, and to get some of those higher price guys in there, I don't mind using him in cash at all. And then on DK, you know, I've seen some traction too. I think Marcus Johnson for Indy for 300 or yeah, 3K. I think he's minimum price there. He can really help you get some of those higher price guys in your build. DJ Moore a little bit on DK as well. So those are kind of some of the cash game plays I think that are kind of available for both sites.
Okay, Tuttle.
Yeah, you guys know how
interested in tournaments here.
Yeah, you know how Blender does his ownership review on Twitter like the day after, where he compares to like the $5 double up versus the 50.
Yep,
Marcus Johnson is my guess is the guy that's going to stand out the most between the higher ups dollars playing him versus him not being at quite his zone in the 5% or $5. Christy brought it up. I mean, he just makes everything fit on DraftKings. He is 3K and makes everything work. And he has shown us some upside in the past too. I think he had a 100-yard game just 2 games ago. So I do think Marcus Johnson is a good cash game play. And most people don't view 3K options as cash game plays, but I think he's a strong cash game option just for lineup construction in its own right. I mean, I like all the tournament options, or I like all these options that Christy mentioned in the high price. I guess one guy I'll mention, I don't have him in my single entry GPP lineups, but I think he makes a ton of sense. And I think this could be a spot where we're going to look back and be like, why didn't we play this guy more? He's the awesome. I would argue he's the best leverage play on the slate, DeAndre Hopkins, 8,200. Again, we talked about how high of ownership we're going to have on Chase Edmonds this week. I think everybody's going to play Edmonds, and then they're not going to play Kyler. They're not going to play DeAndre. And this could be a spot where, Hopkins goes off for 35, 40 points, and we're like, why didn't we play this guy? So yeah, I think Hopkins is one of the best leverage plays on the entire slate, just for the Chase Edmonds reasons, and also because all these other high-owned receivers, I think, are going to be higher owned, or much higher owned than him. In terms of other guys, kind of his pivots off of like the Tyler Lockett's and Julio's of the world in that same price range, I think Allen Robinson makes for a pretty strong tournament option. Tyreek Hill is a good tournament option. Hill's in that game with a little bit of wind potential, but I still think he's fine for tournaments as well. And then I think in tournaments, any and all of the Pittsburgh receivers, good luck deciding which one it's going to be this week. Deontay Johnson, when he's been healthy and when he plays the complete game, he's the guy that typically has been seeing the largest target share. But who knows if that's going to happen this week. So Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and Juju are all guys that I think if you're running out multiple lineups, I think you do want exposure to them. And I think they're also very strong leverage plays as well, just because I think they'll come in at lower ownership than James Conner, I believe.
Okay. I want to get to this question by Donnie. He says, isn't Blake the guy who's filling in for Ridley also at 3K? So is that a strong option?
So that's been... I want to be careful how I approach this. I think that is the likeliest path to happen. Mm-hmm. And that's what they've shown us, Atlanta, so far this season, is that they kind of treat it as direct backups. Zacchaeus is kind of the direct backup is Julio. Hershey Blake's kind of been the direct backup is Ridley. I think that is the most likely scenario to happen, but I'm not as confident as many people this week that are like, oh yeah, it's 100% going to happen. That's 100% how it's going to work. I think, if I was 100% confident that was the way to work, I think you could very easily argue that Blake's the better play than Marcus Johnson. I just think Johnson's in line for a much more stable role and something I can rely on. Again, if you have a different read on that situation, though, if you are much more confident that Blake is 100% going to see those Ridley snaps, then go for it.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and talk about tight end. And Tuttle, I think you lead this, and then we'll get to Christy.
Yeah, so tight end, I think on DraftKings, you're probably in this kind of 4K range in terms of lineup construction. The guy that I like the most by quite a bit is Noah Fant. I think he easily has the highest upside in this range. I've talked about it a lot with some other people this week who are looking at playing like Hayden Hurst and Hunter Henry. Like, I think these guys are fine options. They just, you're hoping they score a touchdown, basically. Whereas Noah Fant, you have outs for a 100-plus yard receiving game. You have outs for touchdowns as well. So I do like Fant the most out of this kind of mid-range if you can get up to him. You have to make some minor sacrifices elsewhere, but I do think he's the guy that I want on DraftKings. On FanDuel, you can get Waller in some lineups if you can get up to there. Otherwise, it's Fant again for me on FanDuel as well. But I think there are more paths on FanDuel to be able to get up to Darren Waller than there are on DraftKings.
Christy, tight end?
Yeah, so tight end too. Yep, I agree. You kind of find yourself in that 4K range a lot, I think, on DraftKings this week. But I think Waller's a great play this week, and Noah Fant. I know I find him in a lot of my lineups too. He's someone I'm very high on. Hayden Hurst, like we mentioned, it'll be interesting to see where Kelsey's ownership goes, just because I think there's going to be a lot of people paying down a little bit more, and Kelsey's always a great play. TJ Hawkinson, have a little bit of interest in him as well in the Minnesota-Detroit game. And I think those are kind of the few guys that I'm kind of keying in for tight end this week.
Okay, great. That brings us to defense. Sometimes there's an obvious play, sometimes there is not. Where do we stand this week?
Yeah, so I'll start with FanDuel first, because I think Pittsburgh's going to carry a decent amount of ownership. Pittsburgh and James Conner, kind of the correlation there. If you're looking to save some money, a couple plays on FanDuel that I like the Texans, going up against inexperienced quarterback. I think opportunity for the Texans defense to make some good plays there. Falcons D, and then also have some interest in Arizona and the Titans, probably on FanDuel. And going to DraftKings, I still like the Falcons. I think they're $2,500 to save some money. My favorite play is maybe the Giants. They're just a little bit more expensive. Again, and then you can go to the Texans or Titans or even Washington. You have to pay up a little bit more for them, especially on DraftKings. But those are the few that I'm kind of looking at DraftKings.
Tuttle, you got a defense?
Yeah, on DraftKings, I think if you need to, it's not going to feel that comfortable. But Vikings at 2,400, I think, are in play as well. FanDuel, I think, just like Christy said, it's a lot easier to get up to the Steelers defense, so completely fine doing that. Otherwise, between the Texans and Titans, which I think will be the choice on FanDuel between people, I do like the Texans better. Like if you guys know what playerprofiler.com is, go there. Or if you don't know what it is, go there. Check out Luton's comp is Tom Savage. This guy is a statue. He's got a really, really strong arm, but he cannot move. His agility score was in the bottom 1 percentile. Just can't move at all. So if they are able to get pressure on him, he's going to get sacked.
Okay, great. Let's see here. I think that just brings us to some QQs. So let's get into it real quick. I'm going to we'll pull up this question from S. Berger, DK Cash, and we'll start with you, Christy. Andrews Marcus or HH, Hunter Henry, and Mooney?
Okay, so say that again. They wanted one out of each of those, or one?
Yeah, it was DK Cash, Andrews and Marcus J, or HH and Mooney.
Or HH and Mooney. I think for Cash, I would go Marcus Johnson. And then you said Hunter Henry or Mooney?
Yeah. No, I believe it's Andrews and Marcus J versus Hunter Henry and Mooney.
Okay. I'd say the first one.
Sorry, that was kind of a difficult one to start on. Hey, real quick, I forgot. We got to talk about stacks. That's what I left out here. Yeah. So your favorite game stack, Christy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I wrote this up in my article this week and mentioned it on Expert Survey. I very much like the Houston Jags game this week. I think I do like the Seattle Buffalo game as well. I think that's going to be a great game. I like both of them, but I'm hoping to get the Houston Jags and some of those players at maybe a little bit lower ownership than we'd normally see them.
Tuttle?
Yeah, my favorite stack, Baltimore Colts game in terms of lower ownership. Mm-hmm. Higher ownership, yeah, I mean, it's the Seattle Buffalo game. I think the play, if you're not like full out stacking Seattle Buffalo, is just to completely fade it, which is absolutely terrifying. Mm-hmm. But I do think that's kind of the play there, and hope that some crazy voodoo goes on and that it ends up being low scoring. But yeah, the lower ownership stack that I like the most is the Baltimore-Indianapolis game.
Okay, great. Let's get back to some of these questions. We've got 6 or 7 minutes to get it done. So we'll start with 508 Nate. He says DK Cash, Dalvin and Marvin, or Keenan Allen and Josh Jacobs. Tuttle?
Dalvin. You're playing Dalvin and Cash.
Okay, Dalvin and Marvin it is. Donnie Watson says, Christy, in a large field GPP, do you like a Teddy B Carolina stack in a game where they have to play catch up?
Yeah, I can see making a case for that in a large field for sure. Yep.
Okay. Ink Magma says DJ Dallas and John Brown viable as a secondary correlation in a DraftKings GPP. Also, shout out to the fact that he's thinking about secondary correlations, which is already high level stuff. Anyway, DJ Dallas and John Brown.
Yeah, so I kind of said it that like I prefer just straight fading the game if you're not going to have any exposure to it, but I think that's a perfectly fine way to attack the game as well. Basically hope DJ Dallas plops in for a couple touchdowns. So yeah, I'm fine with both those guys in tournaments for sure.
Mark Flores says DKGPP. Christy, you want a Chargers stack or Chiefs stack?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I'd probably, I like them both actually. But I would probably say, I'd probably go with Chargers.
All right, we'll go to JM, DK Cash. It's a 3v3 for you, Tuttle. Get ready. Russ, Connor, Hurst, or Watson, Dalvin, Burton. You did say if
you're playing Dalvin, man.
Yeah.
Play Dalvin and Cash, guys. I mean, I don't love Burton. I would probably change something else in your lineup to be able to get Burton up to Hurst. But play Dalvin, guys.
Yeah. All right. Fit Crooks, DK Cash. Thankfully, this one's going to Christy. Dalvin Cook and Brandon Cooks, or James Conner and Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, the first one. I agree. I mean, Dalvin Cook is just the play this week, I think. And I think you definitely want him in your lineup.
Okay. Hutch Boy, DK Cash, I thought it said all defense. Atlanta defense and Marvin Jones, or Arizona defense and Sterling Shepard.
Well, I like Sterling Shepard better than Marvin Jones anyways, so that's the one for me.
Okay. Go to JRC FanDuel Cash. You want Shepard and Waller or Cooks and Noah Fant?
That's a tough one because I actually like both of those. What was the first one again? Did you say? Cooks and
Waller. Did I make that up? It was Shepard and Waller versus Cooks and Fant.
Shepard and Waller. I say the first one.
Okay, great. More questions coming in. Jeremy says, hey, Roth, can you ask for a Yahoo GPP, Montgomery or Fournette? I can ask.
I like Fournette there.
Yeah.
Okay. Donnie says, hey, real quick, who's Tuttle's favorite bring back in Baltimore stacks, and why isn't it Trey Burton?
Marcus Johnson.
Okay. Why isn't it Trey Burton?
Because I like getting up to the other tight end options better.
Okay. Abraham Levy says, Arizona stack. Anyone? Arizona stack?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I do like Kyler in tournaments, and definitely with Edmonds being on there. And like we said, you know, Hopkins is going to be a little under-owned. Absolutely. I think that makes a very interesting tournament play.
All right, we'll go to Donald Janowitz. He's Janowitz. Donald says, DK single entry, Watson Cooks or Herbert and Keenan Allen?
I like the Watson Cook side.
All right. Caleb says, anyone on Jordan Wilkins? Question mark, exclamation mark, question mark, exclamation mark, repeated 10 times.
I'm not this week.
Tuttle, anyone on Jordan Wilkins, but yell it.
I'm not currently. I'm fully expecting the Jonathan Taylor troll game.
Exactly.
Okay. Gregorius says, DK Cash, Locke and Shepard or Allen and M. Johnson?
I'd say the first one. You said Lockett and Shepard?
I think so. No, Locke.
Oh, Locke. Okay, gotcha.
Locke and Shepard versus Allen and M. Johnson.
Yeah, I'll take the first one.
Okay, all right. Still a few questions left before lock. Hey, guys, if you like this, did you know we have a promo going on Rotogrinders where you can get this kind of content all the time for every sport? And this is just a taste. This is a nibble of the smorgasbord of content that we give out. Devin just dropped the link in the YouTube chat. Also, don't forget, hit like and subscribe because this is free information. And if you like and subscribe, that helps us out. So we're helping you. You help us. Thank you for that. Dave says, DK Cash, Wilson, DJ, and Lockett, or Josh Allen, Edmonds, and Moore?
What was the first one? Wilson, DJ, and Lockett?
Yep.
Yeah, it's got to be that.
Paul says, FanDuel single entry, DJ and Juju, or Edmonds and Claypool?
What was the first one again? It was
FanDuel single entry, DJ and Juju, or Edmonds Claypool?
The second one.
What are your thoughts on Marvin Hall? Anyone? Any interest?
Not a ton, but he's not bad.
Christy?
If I was going to play him maybe on DraftKings, I think he was $3,800 when I looked, but if I'm in that range, I'm going Marcus Johnson.
Adam says Slayton or Deontay Johnson, DK Cash?
DIONTAE.
Mm-hmm.
All right. My hot take is Slayton. All over Slayton. That's all he does. Slayton's a guy. Dave says, thanks, guys. And what do you think? Are we Devin? Yeah, that's pretty much the lock. All those things that I said before about liking, subscribing, hanging out with us, and maybe even becoming a Core 4 member at a discount. Good time to do so. A couple questions on Luton? Luton?
Luton,
I don't even know that person.
He's the guy that I said look at his player profiler because it's hilarious how little mobility he has.
Statuesque, yes.
Yeah.
Any interest in playing him, though?
I do not.
I don't. No.
No. Okay. All right. That is the lock. Generally, at this time, we get out of here, but I got to brag on myself real quick.
Awesome.
There we go. I was playing the giant single entry, what is it? Showdown slate.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a unique lineup, and I was in like 4th place out of thousands of people entering the 4th quarter. And I was like, holy crap, I'm going to take down a tournament. And I was the only one with like Slayton at the captain. Then, obviously I ended up winning like $2, which is kind of the fun of the showdown slate, I think. But I felt so good to be like in the mix at the end of a game, It was like my first official sweat.
Well, half the battle too is just getting a unique lineup too. So that's exciting too when you're in the top.
Yeah. It felt pretty cool. And it's just like the more I listen to you guys and I learn what I'm doing wrong, I become a better player. And Like I literally am such a better player now than I was 8 weeks ago, just from listening to y'all and like making little tweaks to my game. So thank you for that. Thanks for giving me a sweat, even though I didn't win. I had a good time. So hopefully some of the people there at home are going through that same transformation. They're learning not just what guys to play, but also why we're doing it. And hopefully we can win some people some money. So with that, I think we get on out of here. So Christy, Tuttle, good hanging out with you.
You guys too.
Okay. Yep. And everybody at home, we appreciate you. We love you. And we will catch you next week. You have been crunched.